The following compilation features unsettling and spine-chilling tales sourced from Reddit's horror communities. Reader discretion is strongly advised. These narratives may contain graphic descriptions, psychological distress, and themes that could unsettle sensitive individuals. Proceed with caution, as immersion into these eerie stories may provoke fear, unease, and sleep disturbances. Enter this realm of Reddit's creepy horror stories at your own risk, as the line between reality and the macabre may blur within these chilling narratives. I never should have taken that babysitting job. The moment I stepped into that suburban nightmare, I knew something was off, but I needed the money. And honestly, how bad could watching an 18-year-old be? Turns out, pretty fucking bad. It all started when I saw the ad online. Babysitter needed for 18-year-old son. Great pay, flexible hours. I know what you're thinking. Why the hell does an 18-year-old need a babysitter? That's exactly what I asked Mrs. Dalvan when I showed up for the interview. "Oh, Roberts. Special," she said, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. "He needs supervision. Someone to make sure he takes his medication, doesn't leave the house, that sort of thing." I nodded, trying not to let my confusion show. The pay was incredible, way more than I'd ever made babysitting before. And as a broke college student, I couldn't afford to be picky. "There's just one more thing," Mr. Dalvan added, his deep voice startling me. I hadn't even noticed him enter the room. The last few babysitters, well, they didn't work out. Left rather abruptly, I'm afraid, but I'm sure that won't be a problem with you, will it, Adriana? Something in his tone made me want to run, but I pushed the feeling aside. Of course not. "Sir, I'm very reliable." And that's how I found myself alone in the Dalvan house on a Friday night, wondering what the hell I'd gotten myself into. The house itself was normal enough, a typical suburban two-story with a manicured lawn and a white picket fence. But something about it felt off. Maybe it was the way the floorboards creaked even when no one was walking on them, or how the air felt thick and heavy, like the house was holding its breath. Robert was in his room when I arrived. Mrs. Dalvan introduced us briefly before she and her husband left for their date night. "Remember, Adriana," she said, her hand gripping my arm just a little too tightly. "Robert doesn't leave his room after 8 p.m., and whatever you do, don't go into the basement." I laughed nervously. "Why? You got a monster down there or something?" Neither of them smiled. Mr. Dalvan just said, "The basement door stays locked, for everyone's safety." And with that cheerful goodbye, they were gone, leaving me alone with Robert and a house full of secrets. For the first few hours, everything was fine. Robert stayed in his room, only emerging once to grab a snack. He barely spoke 2 words to me, just nodded and disappeared back upstairs. It wasn't until around 10 p.m. that things started to get weird. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when I heard it, a soft thump, like something heavy hitting the floor, then another, and another. It was coming from the basement. My heart started racing. I told myself it was just the house settling, or maybe a raccoon had gotten in somehow, but deep down, I knew that wasn't it. I tried to ignore it. I really did, but the thumps kept coming, growing louder and more insistent. And then I heard something else, a voice, muffled but unmistakable, calling out for help. Fuck. I knew I shouldn't go down there. Every horror movie I'd ever seen was screaming at me to get the hell out of that house. But what if someone was hurt? What if the Dalvans had been in an accident and somehow ended up trapped in their own basement? I grabbed a heavy flashlight from the kitchen drawer and made my way to the basement door. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the lock. The door swung open with a creak that seemed to echo through the entire house. I flicked on my flashlight and peered down the stairs. Nothing but darkness. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. "Is anyone down there?" No response, just more thumping. Taking a deep breath, I started down the stairs. Each step creaked and groaned under my weight, and I swear I could feel eyes on me, watching from the darkness. When I reached the bottom, I swept my flashlight around the room. It looked like a normal basement at first. Washing machine, dryer, some old boxes piled in corners, but then my light fell on something that made my blood run cold. A door that shouldn't be there, hidden behind a stack of boxes. As I approached it, the thumping grew louder. It was definitely coming from behind that door. I hesitated, my hand on the doorknob. Every instinct was screaming at me to turn back, to run out of the house and never look back. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone needed help. I tried to turn the knob, but it was locked, panic rising in my throat. I pressed my ear against the wood. That's when I heard it, a soft whisper, barely audible help. My flashlight beam caught something, a thin crack between the door and the frame. I leaned in close, trying to peek through. An eye, a human eye, wide with fear, staring back at me through the crack. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. What the fuck was going on in this house? I was about to try breaking down the door when I heard footsteps upstairs. Robert, or Mr. Dalvan, or whoever the hell was really living in this house. In that moment, survival instinct kicked in. I knew I couldn't let them know I'd discovered whatever sick secret they were hiding down here, not if I wanted to make it out alive. I raced back up the stairs as quietly as I could, locking the basement door behind me. I had just settled back onto the couch, trying to control my breathing, when Robert appeared at the top of the stairs. "Everything okay down here?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. I forced a smile. "Yeah, all good. Just watching some TV." He nodded, his eyes boring into me like he could see right through my lie. Then he turned and went back to his room. As soon as he was gone, I let out a shaky breath. I knew I should run, should call the police, should do anything but stay in this house of horrors. But the image of that eye, pleading for help, was burned into my mind. And the reality of my situation hit me hard. I was broke, desperate. I needed this job, at least for a few more nights until I could figure out what to do. So I made a decision that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I decided to stay, to pretend I hadn't seen anything, to come back tomorrow night, and the night after that, until I could find a way to help whoever was trapped in that basement. Little did I know, I was walking right into a nightmare that was far worse than anything I could have imagined. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that terrified eye staring back at me through the crack in the basement door. But I had to go back. I needed the money, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone down there needed my help. The next night, I arrived at the Dalvan house with a pit in my stomach. Mrs. Dalvan greeted me with that same plastic smile. "Oh, Adriana, we're so glad you came back," she said, her voice sickly sweet. "So many babysitters find Robert challenging." I forced a smile. "No problems here, Mrs. Dalvan. Robert's a breeze." As soon as they left, I started planning. I needed to find a way into that basement room, but I couldn't risk getting caught. I spent the first few hours pretending everything was normal, checking on Robert periodically and watching TV with the volume up to mask any sounds I might make. Around midnight, I heard Robert's door close. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my phone and the flashlight I'd brought from home. This time, I was prepared. The basement was just as creepy as I remembered. My heart pounded as I approached the hidden door, praying it would somehow be unlocked this time. No such luck. I pressed my ear against the wood. "Hello?" I whispered. "Is anyone there?" For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, so faint I almost missed it. "Please, help us." Us. There was more than one person down there. I fumbled with my phone, pulling up the lock-picking video I'd watched earlier. It looked so easy online. but my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the bobby pin steady. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I heard a soft click. The door creaked open, and the smell hit me like a punch to the gut. Sweat, blood, and something worse. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing a nightmare. The room was small, maybe 10 by 10 feet, and it was full of people. Young women, mostly crammed together like sardines. Some were barely conscious. Others stared at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Oh my God," I breathed. "What the fuck is this?" One of the girls, her face gaunt and her eyes sunken, spoke up. "You're the new babysitter, aren't you?" Her voice was hoarse, like she hadn't used it in a long time. They always bring in a new one when they take one of us. The implications of her words made me want to vomit. I don't understand. Who are you? What is this place?" "We're the other babysitters," another girl said. "The ones who left abruptly." My mind was reeling. This couldn't be happening. This kind of thing didn't happen in real life, in normal suburbs with white picket fences. "We have to get you out of here," I said, my voice shaking. "I'll call the police." "We'll..." "No." Several of them shouted at once, then immediately hushed, glancing fearfully at the ceiling. "You can't," the first girl said. "They'll know. They always know. And then you'll end up down here with us. And the next babysitter will come, and the cycle will continue." "But..." A noise from upstairs cut me off. Footsteps. "Go," one of the girls hissed, "before they catch you. But please, don't leave us here. Find a way to help us." I wanted to argue, to insist on getting them out right now. But I knew she was right. If I got caught, I couldn't help anyone. I closed the door, my hands shaking so bad I could barely lock it. I had just made it back upstairs when Robert appeared in the living room doorway. "What are you doing up?" he asked, his voice unnervingly calm. I forced a smile. "Just getting a glass of water. Thought I heard a noise, but it was nothing." He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes boring into mine like he could see right through my lie. Then he nodded. "Get some sleep, Adriana. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." As I watched him climb the stairs, a chill ran down my spine. Somehow, I knew he was right. Tomorrow was going to be very long indeed. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? The faces of those girls haunted me every time I closed my eyes. I spent the night researching, trying to find any information about missing persons in the area, about the Dalvans, about anything that could help me make sense of this nightmare. I found nothing. It was like the Dalvans didn't exist outside of this house. The next evening, I arrived at the house with a plan. It wasn't a good plan, but it was all I had. I'd smuggled in my laptop, a portable Wi-Fi hotspot, and a small camera. If I couldn't get the girls out tonight, I'd at least get proof to take to the police. Mrs. Dalvan greeted me with that same plastic smile. "Adriana, dear, we're so pleased you're settling in well. Robert seems quite fond of you." The way she said it made my skin crawl. As soon as they left, I set up my laptop in the living room. The camera pointed at the basement door. Then I waited. Hours passed. Robert stayed in his room. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Around midnight, I heard it. A soft click, like a lock turning. Then footsteps, coming up from the basement. I held my breath, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it would give me away. The basement door opened, and Mr. Dalvan stepped out, but he wasn't alone. He was dragging one of the girls from the hidden room. I bit back a scream. The girl's eyes were wide with terror, her mouth gagged. She looked right at me, silently pleading for help. Mr. Dalvan didn't notice me. He was too focused on his task, pulling the girl towards the front door. I knew I should do something, call the police, scream, anything, but I was frouncing in place, watching in horror as he opened the front door and shoved the girl into a waiting van. As soon as the door closed behind him, I sprang into action. I grabbed my laptop and ran to the basement. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely work the lock. But finally, the door swung open. "We have to go. Now!" I whispered urgently to the remaining girls. "This is our chance." They looked at me with a mixture of hope and fear. Slowly, painfully, they began to move. We were halfway up the basement stairs when the lights flicked on. Robert stood at the top of the stairs, a gun in his hand. Behind him, Mr. and Mrs. Dalvan smiled those terrible plastic smiles. "Oh, Adriana," Mrs. Dalvan sighed. "We had such high hopes for you, but I suppose you'll have to join our little family after all." I opened my mouth to scream, but before I could, something hard connected with the back of my head. The world went black. When I came to, I was in the hidden room. The other girls were gone. I was alone. No, not alone. Robert Saturday in the corner, watching me with those eerily calm eyes. "Why?" I croaked. "Why are you doing this?" He smiled, and for the first time, I saw something human in his eyes, something sad. "Because," he said softly, "I was the first Robert, the first babysitter, and now you'll be the next Mrs. Dalvan." As the meaning of his words sank in, I heard footsteps approaching. The door opened, and Mr. and Mrs. Dalvan stood there, sea-ringers in hand. "Welcome to the family, Adriana," Mr. Dalvan said. "It's time for your first lesson." But as they approached, something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to become another victim. I wasn't going to let this cycle continue. In a burst of adrenaline, I lunged forward, catching them off guard. I knocked the syringes from their hands and pushed past them, my heart pounding in my ears. I heard shouts behind me as I raced up the basement stairs, taking them two at a time. I had to get out. I had to get help. As I reached the main floor, I could hear them coming after me, but I had youth and desperation on my side. I sprinted for the front door, my fingers fumbling with the lock. Just as I heard footsteps on the stairs, I wrenched the door open and burst into the cool night air. I ran like I'd never run before, not daring to look back. I could hear voices behind me, but they grew fainter as I put distance between myself and that house of horrors. I didn't stop running until I reached a 24-hour diner several blocks away. With shaking hands, I called the police. But as I waited for them to arrive, a chilling thought occurred to me. Would anyone believe my story? And even if they did, would we be able to save the others before the Dalvans made them disappear? I knew one thing for certain. This nightmare was far from over. It's been 3 weeks since I escaped from the Dalvan house. 3 weeks of police interviews, nightmares, and constantly looking over my shoulder. I'm writing this now because I need someone, anyone, to know what happened, what's still happening. When the police arrived at the diner that night, I was a mess, bruised, disheveled, and babbling about hidden rooms and kidnapped babysitters. I could see the doubt in their eyes. But they took my statement and promised to investigate. They went to the house, of course, but by then, it was too late. The Dalvans were gone. The basement room was empty, scrubbed clean. There was no evidence of Robert, no sign of the other girls, nothing to corroborate my story. I insisted they check missing persons reports, look into the history of the house. They did, but it led nowhere. It was like the Dalvans had never existed. The police started to question my story. Was I on drugs? Did I have a history of mental illness? Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing, but I know what I saw, what I experienced. The terror in those girls' eyes, the sadness in Robert's. It was real, all of it. I've spent every waking moment since then trying to find proof. I've scoured social media, online forums, local news archives. I've reached out to every babysitting agency in the area, trying to find others who might have encountered the Dalvans. Yesterday, I finally found something, a post on an obscure missing persons forum, dated 3 years ago. It was from a woman looking for her daughter, who had disappeared after taking a babysitting job. The details were vague, but one thing stood out: the family's name. Dalvan. It's not much, but it's a start. Proof that I'm not crazy. That somewhere out there, the Dalvans are still operating, still trapping young women in their twisted family. I don't know what to do next. The police won't listen to me anymore. I'm afraid to go to the media. What if the Dalvans see it and disappear again? But I can't just do nothing. So I'm posting this here, hoping someone will believe me, hoping someone might have information that could help, and most of all, hoping to warn others. If you see a job posting for a babysitter needed for an 18-year-old, don't take it. If you meet a family named Dalvan, run. And if you're a young woman considering a babysitting job, please, be careful. Be so careful. Because somewhere out there, the Dalvans are watching, waiting for their next victim, their next Mrs. Dalvan, and I'm the only one who knows the truth. She fell asleep. That was all the opportunity we needed to defy the rule about Saturday morning cartoons. We could watch Disney stuff and Looney Tunes, but G.I. Joe, Transformers, Smurfs, He-Man and some other less memorable shows were not allowed, especially forbidden. However, the one we were told would corrupt our souls within a single viewing was the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon that ran from 1982 to 1985. If you're unfamiliar, the show was about some kids who get trapped in the dangerous and fantastical world of D&D. That's about how much I actually remember about it. I looked it up on Wikipedia recently. Apparently, it was pretty violent. A lot of 80s content was, though, wasn't it? The National Coalition. On television, violence pressured the FTC to put a warning at the beginning of each episode. They wanted it to say that D&D was directly responsible for people violently dying. The NCTV's request was soundly denied due to a total lack of evidence. That didn't stop a good chunk of the world, including my parents, from believing that evil lurked within the pages of Tolkien and, I don't know, under Smurf hats. All of it became banned from our household. And that's what made it so fascinating. Ironically, if everybody had just shut up, we probably wouldn't have cared about the D&D cartoon. They'd turned it into forbidden fruit. Plus, Looney Tunes got pretty boring after half an hour. Our younger brother, Matthew, was still a baby. He fell asleep on Mom, and she was out on the couch before the coyote got clobbered with his own anvil. John, my older brother by 3 years, looked at me before creeping to the TV. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Don't," I added when his fingers turned the dial. "We'll get in trouble." "Shut up, Pete," he replied softly. He crouched and watched the screen. I scooted forward and sat next to him on the floor. For the first time, we watched beyond the opening of the show. I vaguely remember a roller coaster or a ride of some kind. The cartoon kids got transported and changed into wizards and warriors. There's a little kid in a barbarian costume with a club, I'm pretty sure. I couldn't tell you what the episode was about because I couldn't focus. I was scared. Our parents said this exact cartoon was evil and could hurt us. At some point, I reached to change the channel. John grabbed my wrist and squeezed until it hurt. I could have woken up Mom. I could have screamed and hit my brother. I could have told on John and blamed him entirely for what we were doing. Instead, I rubbed my wrist and continued watching. That's about when the shot cut to a dark and cluttered room. Television was less refined in the 80s. Commercials were all kinds of crazy. So we weren't scared until we recognized the room as our very own unfinished basement. "That's my pennant," John said. He pointed at a yellow felt triangle sticking out of a box. The one I'd thrown up on last Christmas. Dad had kept it with some idea of restoring the accolade. We all knew it would rot down there. We joked about it. I didn't understand. Why is it on TV? John looked afraid. He didn't understand either. "I don't..." A man walked into the shot, his back to the camera. He was tall and had on a dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up. His hair was wavy and blonde like Bose from Dukes of Hazzard. He seemed to be looking for something, but not very hard. Faster than expected. He spun and his face was close to the camera. Both John and I flinched and reached for each other. "Who do we have here?" He breathed into what sounded like a microphone, touching his mustached lips. His face moved up and down in the frame, and we saw only his eye at one point, and then his mouth again. John's eyes darted back and forth from the TV to our basement door. I was shaking so hard. The man grasped the camera, the sides of our screen, and stepped back so we could see his entire face. He looked like an actor with a practiced smile. For the rest of my days, I will never forget that face for its incongruity. The genuine mirth and the curvature of his lips were in stark contrast to his soulless blue eyes. A familiar creak came from the last basement stair. John covered my mouth as I began to yelp. The strange ordeal on the screen ended. D&D resumed. Stunned, we watched for a few more seconds before John turned the dial back to Looney Tunes. He crossed his lips for me to be quiet and crept over to the basement door. I shook my head. "No, John, no," I rasped. He ignored me as he disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a steak knife. With a trembling hand, he opened the basement door, lifting the handle to stop the hinges from whining. Then that 9-year-old boy went down the steps, intent on defending his family as the man of the house. Our dad worked every day but Sunday. The minute or so of total silence felt excruciatingly long, yet John returned without ceremony. He put the knife away and came back to the living room. "What happened?" I asked him. He shook his head. "Nothing. There's nobody down there. Must be some weird prank." "But that was our basement," I countered. He shrugged. "Nah. I mean, maybe, I guess. But probably not. A lot of basements look the same. Pete." Mom started to wake up. "But the pennant," I said. He ignored me. The rest of the day went by like any other Saturday. We played outside with the neighborhood kids. John and I didn't talk about the weird commercial. We certainly didn't mention defying the ban on popular cartoons. But I felt bad. Worse, I felt damned, like I was for sure going to hell when I died. For weeks, I prayed for forgiveness and became more anxious about dying. Fuck, I was 6 years old. The feeling never really went away, but I could sleep and play. I suppose the fear relented as the memory of the ordeal faded. I only know this to be true, however, because the terror came right back the night we found John sleepwalking. We shared a bunk bed. He always let me pick the top or bottom as I preferred. Those days I chose the top. Made me feel a little safer, knowing my older brother was between me and whatever monsters might be trying to get in. I never suspected him of being the monster. I recoiled into a ball when a face in our darkened bedroom appeared above the rail of my bunk. It was John, of course, but his eyes were nearly shut and he was muttering gibberish. He left our bedroom and turned on the hallway light before heading downstairs. Both Mom and Dad were in their doorway by the time I got there. It had been really difficult to get out of bed. John's strange behavior I immediately connected to our transgression. If that sounds ridiculous, I can assure you the events that followed only assured me of it. "What's going on, Pete?" Dad asked. Gently. I think he knew I was afraid. "John's acting funny," I said. He went downstairs. After exchanging apprehensive expressions, my parents went to find John. They didn't know I followed closely behind them, or that I felt very scared. This had everything to do with D&D and the man with the mustache on the commercial. We found John sitting on the floor, his nose close to the black TV screen. None of the lights were on. Shadows filled his eye sockets. I clutched the belt of Mom's housecoat. She nearly leapt out of her skin and gave me a stern look before pulling me under her arm. "John?" my dad asked. My brother slowly turned his head. His eyes were shut. The man with the mustache on the commercial, he droned before lifting his hand to point at the basement door. Almost at the same moment, a high-pitched scream came from below. Neither male nor female. That level of anguish is genderless. My dad put himself between us and the basement door. John's eyes snapped open. Mom pulled him close and kept me firmly entwined in her left arm. Dad went to the kitchen for his weapon of choice, the trusty black slugger behind the fridge. He had its twin upstairs beside his bed. Go upstairs. Bring Matthew to our room. Stay together. Lock the door. I'll call the police. Mom pulled us so fast. It felt like I flew. Matthew stayed asleep and fed while John and I stood guard inside with her. As the oldest, it was John's right to claim the bat. If he fell, however, it was my responsibility to take it up and avenge him. It didn't seem too long before Dad knocked at the door. It's me. Open up. Everything's fine. John nodded for me to open the door. Dad could be under threat, so I would open it, and John would leap to his rescue if it were required. Fortunately, it was not. Yet, we could see Dad's fear as plainly as the sweat on his skin. His smile took effort. Nothing in the basement. Did the police come? Mom asked. Go to bed. Boys, he said. Everything's fine. It was nothing. Neither of us believed him. We'd all heard that scream. But we obediently went to our bunks with no intention of sleeping. Our house was so small. Nothing spoken remained a secret. I don't think my parents know how loud they really are. I'll strip the extraneous from their overheard conversation. The key takeaway came from Dad. I didn't call the police. Why? Because we need a priest. He said priest, but he meant pastor. Pentecostals don't have priests, just pastors in regular clothes. The next evening we were sent to our rooms after supper. We didn't argue. We knew the guest coming was a pastor from the church. Not the senior pastor, but the other guy. A junior, I guess. With the sun still up, and our nerves about to exit our flesh, John and I listened for the pastor's arrival. Our parents admitted him, offered him coffee, which he politely declined, and led him to the basement. I recognized every noise in every stair. They must have been down there for less than a minute before we heard a rush of footsteps to the kitchen. I'm afraid, the pastor said, his voice shaky. This is quite serious. Do you think it's... Do not name it, the pastor warned. He laughed nervously after. Sorry, I need to call Pastor Shepherd. I know they sent me, but I have to tell you, this is, my first time. And, he trailed off incoherently, as though Shepherd really was the senior pastor's name. I didn't change it. Our parents came upstairs later with a box of Tim Hortons donuts and milk. It wasn't a bribe, but it certainly didn't hurt their chances of us following their instructions. Tim Hortons in the 80s was freaking top-notch. They actually made their donuts at the store in those days, and they were huge. I felt guilty for enjoying them. If only we hadn't switched the channel. The pastor has some work to do, Dad said, and he will be here through the night. Pray for him, and don't leave your room, no matter what, okay? We agreed. He called us good boys and left. I looked at John. He knew I wanted to tell them what we'd done. He just shook his head and went to his bunk. I tried to busy myself with toys, some books, and finally cleaning. If I could do something good, like tidying up, then maybe it would make up a little for my transgression. Hours dragged. John rolled over to face the wall and seemed to be asleep. It finally got dark out. I stood by the window and watched the street. I'm not sure how long before I heard the front door of our house open. The pastor strode quickly through the streetlight, his hands jammed into his coat pockets. He quickly walked out of sight along the sidewalk, looking back once as if to check for someone following. His departure made me afraid. The hurried exit looked a lot like retreat. Whatever thing might be in the basement had defeated him, and we were, once again, on our own against the forces of evil. All because of me. John too, of course, but he had given in to temptation first. It was my responsibility to pick up what he had lost, and I had failed. That meant, in my little head, too old for my age, that I must solve the problem. I took my pocket-sized King James Bible from my underwear drawer. Pentecostals have no particular Bible of their own. Next, I found the 2x2 piece of wood my father had carved a point on, my sword. Last, I took the tiny flip knife on John's dresser. Yes, I didn't ask to borrow it. but I figured he would have loaned it to me given the circumstances. Lifting the handle of my bedroom door to prevent the hinges from protesting my exit, I left my room, deftly avoiding the major reactionary noises of the hardwood floor. It was late. All the bedroom doors, except my own, were closed. I crept downstairs and saw the basement had been left open. A dim light pushed at the darkness of the first landing. One of the 3 dangling light bulbs had been left on. The cowardly pastor had neglected to switch it off during his flight. Right now, I write as if I wasn't deathly afraid, like some idyllic crusader about to earn redemption through holy resolve. But I was just a kid, and I didn't want to go down there. I wanted to go to bed and wake up on the Saturday morning before Mom had fallen asleep on the couch. The trick to the basement stairs was walking on the sides of each worn step. I didn't make a sound and landed on the concrete floor like a cat, so focused on where I stepped, I didn't see my colossal error. The pastor had never left. His white sleeves were rolled up to the bicep. He wasn't looking at me. I saw his back. He looked for something, but not very hard. I knew what came next, yet trying to run away was exactly the cause of his swift turn and approach. I accidentally kicked a box with my foot and alerted him to my presence. The speed with which he moved seemed unnatural because I took my eyes off him for a moment. Then he was there, very close to my face, and grasping my shoulders. "Who do we have here?" I shut my eyes, and he immediately released me. "Whoops. Sorry," he said. Sometimes I forget not everyone wants me in their personal space. I opened my eyes and he was still a bit too close, so I took a step back. His blue eyes weren't cold, they were worried. His smile was false, but it was for a reason. He wanted to pretend everything was all right. "You should go back up to bed. Pretty sure your dad told you not to come out of your room, pal." The pastor appeared more and more uncomfortable, grasping his elbows. "My dad?" I asked, bewildered and confused. "A 6-year-old boy." The man with the mustache cleared his throat. He needed a break. I sent him to the 7-Eleven for cigarettes. "I've been trying to quit." Wrong time to quit. After another prolonged, awkward moment, he noticed my armaments. "Why are you down here?" "Peter?" I held out the Bible. I don't know why. Before he could finish reaching for it, an invisible fire rippled across my chest. The pain was so sudden and intense, I screamed like never before. It felt like hot knives were crisscrossing my ribs. The shriek I'd heard the night of John's sleepwalking didn't sound exactly like the one I'd belted. But it wouldn't, would it? It's the difference between the voice you hear when you speak and when you hear it on recording. I whimpered and struggled to remove my shirt. The pastor knelt down and helped it off. He didn't ask what was wrong. He seemed to know already. "Pray, Peter. Pray." He encouraged me. I tried, but the pain got worse and worse with each word. "Don't stop, Peter. It hurts." The pastor prayed. "Dear God, please help this child." He held me down to the floor to stop my writhing. "In the name of Jesus Christ, leave this child alone." At once, the pain ended. We smiled at one another. I started to laugh, but he still couldn't flush all the worry from his expression. And then the real tragedy began. My dad came down the basement stairs. He stared at the man with the mustache and dropped the cigarettes and lighter where he stood. "Go upstairs, Peter." "Dad, Upstairs," he said. And I knew that tone. It meant, right away or else. The man with the mustache recognized what the scene looked like. Him over top of a shirtless 6-year-old and smiling, even if I didn't. Things are not what they seem." He stood up and backed away, patting the front of his pants. "I don't think we're quite done here either. Your son was attacked by it." Dad let the pastor's words die in a prolonged silence, while he waited for me to scramble away. I ran to the top floor and all the doors, except mine, were shut. Mom had woken up, but the shriek was not unexpected. The pastor had been called in for a reason after all. John sat on the edge of his mattress. "Why'd you have to change the channel?" I wailed. John just apologized and knew why he should. He shouldn't have done it. I shouldn't have let him. Our thoughts never strayed from the cartoon failure. The man with the mustache nearly died from the beating he took. Dad intended to kill him. Mom sensed something wrong aside from the suspected infernal presence. She interrupted the attempted murder, but not before the pastor was toothless and disfigured. I guess Dad's anger lessened enough for his brain to understand he couldn't go to jail. My parents put the pastor into the car and took him to the hospital. He apparently regained consciousness and didn't contradict my dad when he lied about a car accident. Mom and Dad didn't stay to see what happened next. The man survived. No charges or questions followed. We stopped going to church. No cartoons. Henceforth, we're forbidden. I didn't understand. I was happy. I didn't know until much later. But I don't want to digress from my family just yet and what ensued after that night. The months and years progressed and John and I grew apart. He developed an interest in our old, dusty basement and started hanging out down there a lot. "Want to see a ghost?" he asked me once. I never wanted to go down there again. Unexplained burning knives is a pain you don't forget. So John went alone, eventually moving his bed and dresser down there when he turned 13. No, the basement never got finished, but he made it somewhat more comfortable with a carpet he'd found on the side of the road and a TV. He played violent video games and listened to heavy metal. Terrible music, Mom said with a shrug. "Just a phase," Dad said. They'd been so thoroughly gutted of their faith. John didn't like me or any of his siblings anymore. He chased us away whenever we asked to play his Super Nintendo. I saw the drugs once when I snuck in. I think I was 14, before I could run away and tell our parents. He caught me and twisted my arm until I agreed not to say anything. "It's just weed," he said. But there were needles. Yet again, I didn't understand. A 14-year-old's drug knowledge should be limited. John died of an overdose shortly after being kicked out of the house. He was 25 and never graduated high school or had a job for long. No friends, girlfriends, or acquaintances attended his funeral because he'd made no strong relationships throughout his short life. And the saddest part, for me, was that nobody cried at his funeral. John had become so unlike his childhood self, so troubled, so violent. I think Mom and Dad and everyone were relieved he was gone for good this time. From that relief came extreme levels of guilt for my parents. Mom went to church again, but Dad refused. They fought over it. Combined with the tragedy of their eldest son, they soon split up. It was all so much to process. I just didn't for the longest time. What may seem like an obvious chain of causation to the day Mom fell asleep on, the couch didn't occur to me until I saw him again. What was left of him, that is. The man with the mustache on the commercial, in our house, doing his best to help 6-year-old me, is confined to a wheelchair. He can't move it on his own. His attendant pushed him to the edge of an apple bin at the grocery store and whispered softly, "These ones today, Pastor, mash up real good. Use the blender." It was a one-sided conversation. He stared at nothing, but I could never forget those blue eyes. All because we'd watched the wrong cartoon and something bad had given us a glimpse of the future. Bidding on abandoned storage lots is a lot more glamorous on television than it is in the flesh. On reality TV, the auctions are filled with colourful characters that you'd love to grab a beer with, and every other rusty door holds priceless collections of Civil War artifacts ready for sale. In the flesh and bone world, the storage hunters aren't quirky savants who can smell out a hidden boon a mile away. They're carrion birds, searching for a cost to benefit high. The real world holds significantly less treasures as well. When that mysterious door slides up, you're more likely to find an old wedding dress and stacks of poorly written love letters than something that's going to pay for your kid's college. Storage lot auctions aren't glamorous places, but they still manage to scratch that itch in the back of my brain. I used to gamble. I used to be good enough to do it professionally. Yet, as these stories go, Lady Luck found some other sob and my career was short-lived. When the bills came tumbling down, I promised my wife, under threat of divorce, that I would never touch cards again. That promise I have kept. When she found out I was betting on a different kind of sport, she was furious. Her finding out, however, coincided with me bringing back home a dusty lawnmower that worked without a hitch. That tempered her anger somewhat. When I returned a month later with a vintage Lego collection that fetched a nice enough price to warrant a vacation, her displeasure diluted into compromise. We made rules. I had a $300 budget for my hobby, and at the end of each month, I would have to walk her through what I found and how much it fetched. It felt emasculating to run everything by my wife, but she knows better than anyone that I need rules to not slide off to a dark place. For months, our rules have kept me from selling out our future again. For months, I have obeyed and kept on the straight and narrow and stifled my inner demons to keep my marriage afloat. Yet, old habits die hard. At my latest auction, I let myself get drunk off of the high of the chase. I broke our rules and have grown to deeply regret it. The start of the evening was far from interesting. In fact, it might have possibly been the most unimpressive showing I have seen at all my auctions. From the 10 or so lots that were shown, each had the makings of sentimental heaps rather than collector's items. I bid once or twice, but I never pressed my claim. My gut kept telling me that there might be something more worthwhile waiting for me deeper into the storage facility. In a way, in a very misguided way, my instincts were correct. The additional locks caught my attention. Along with the usual storage chain, there were 2 other heaps of metal attached to the door of the storage lot. The auctioneer informed us that the facility didn't have the keys to the other 2 locks, but that a bolt cutter would be provided free of charge to the highest bidder. The 2 extra locks piqued my interest, yet it was the man in the drab suit that cemented my need to own whatever was hidden in the storage lot. Heavy, rushed footsteps preceded him. The sound was so distinct in the tight concrete halls that the bidding was paused until the latecomer arrived. He must have been in his late 60s, or perhaps he simply treated his body very poorly. Both his grey pants and plaid jacket were a couple sizes too big for him, and he spoke in a thick Eastern European accent. It was obvious that the man wasn't from around here. It was also obvious he was not interested in bidding. As if the rest of the storage hunters were invisible, the man approached the auctioneer and spoke to him in raspy, quiet words. The auctioneer was wholly uninterested in whatever the old man had to say, but his temper calmed when the old man produced 2 keys that fit the locks. The storage space was his, he announced in broken English. There would be no auction. The auctioneer's face quickly hardened. The old man did, in fact, have the keys to the 2 additional locks, yet the facility locks were still left without a key. Without any proof of ownership, the auction would continue as planned. The strange man seemed to struggle with this idea. He kept repeating how the storage unit belonged to his colleague and how he was the next in line to own it. It wasn't until the bidding started that he gave up on arguing. The initial bid was $50. The crowd was happy to raise. In 10s and 20s, the price accumulated, and the old man watched in despair. When the price had climbed up to $150, with utter discomfort, the man in the drab suit yelled, $300. This, momentarily, quieted down the bidding. The additional locks had piqued my interest. The presence of the strange foreigner raised it further. It wasn't until I heard the desperation in his voice that accompanied the $300 bid that I truly had skin in the game, though. Trying not to think about my wife's face, I offered up $350. The old man's face grew twice as weary. Instead of offering up another bid, he started to argue with the auctioneer in panicked whispers. The auctioneer was deaf to his pleas. All he wanted to hear was a $400 bid. Eventually, with sweat pooling on his brow, the old man relented. He bid $400. I immediately bid $450. The old man didn't bother negotiating with the auctioneer anymore. Now, he was speaking directly to me. He insisted that he was the rightful owner of the storage space. It belonged to a research partner of his from many years ago. That's why he had the keys to the 2 additional locks. He demanded that I stop bidding and leave him to take what is rightfully his. The old man smelled overwhelmingly of sweat and cheap cologne. His breath was of coffee and cigarettes and the slightest hint of sickness. It wasn't pleasant to hear him beg, but I was far too interested in what was hiding behind those metal doors. In broken English, the man tried to change my mind. He couldn't. When that fact dawned upon him, he produced a bushel of crumpled bills out of his pocket. He counted them with shaking, spotted hands. He offered $640 for the unit. When our eyes met, I could sense the slightest bit of relief in his face. He thought he had outbid me. He thought the storage unit was his already. He thought wrong. I offered up $650. The old man had nothing else to bid. In a satisfying collection of seconds that sent a truckload of dopamine crashing through my skull, I became the new owner of the storage unit. The old man pleaded with me, with wet eyes and strained words. He begged me to take his money and leave the mystery of the storage unit be. His begging well surpassed the point of pity. It did not feel good to meet his eyes. I felt bad for the old man, yet I am a slave to the gods of chance. I would not ignore their boon. The old man was relentless in his pleas. When the manager of the storage facility suggested he might call the police, however, the old man quickly retreated. With the strange foreigner out of sight, he faded from my mind. I was too distracted with the contents of the storage space to spare him any more thought. I paid for the lot and signed all the necessary paperwork with the auctioneer, and then made my way through the labyrinthian maze of cement and metal to claim my prize. The lock had been left untouched for years, and the key had trouble fitting through the rust. Yet when it did, when that dirty door came up with a metallic groan, I knew I had struck gold. It was a big storage space, big enough to house a car with plenty of room to spare. The place was filled to the brim. Most of its contents were hidden beneath slabs of dirty cloth, but the storage unit was filled with vintage Pokémon merch. Every inch of the cement walls was covered in Pokémon posters and calendars. Every mysterious object draped in cloth was also covered in countless collections of Pokémon toys and keychains and plushies. The toys were worn and out of their boxes, but I could definitely get at least $200 for them alone. With the rest of the storage space draped in mystery, my gambler's heart fluttered at the prospect of inheriting a collector's collection. My expectations were high, yet when I ripped away one of the cloth drapes, I turned lightheaded. I was looking at a centrifuge, a high-tech, expensive-looking centrifuge straight out of a rich people hospital. A quick Google nearly dropped me to the ground. The thing was worth at least $1,000. My investment had definitely paid off. There was nothing that I wanted to do more than to rip down all the coverings and revel in my good fortune all at once. Yet the rush from the centrifuge was strong enough. I elected to take the lab tech home and pace out my dopamine rush from my earnings over the next couple of days. Though I regret to admit it, a plan hatched in my head. I was going to take the centrifuge back home and sing praises of my good luck to my wife. She would surely be happy about my return on investment, but there was no need for her to know about the rest of the storage unit. The fates had shown me good fortune. It was time for me to move past the silly financial limit my wife put on my hobby. The money from the rest of the storage unit would be my seed fund for future bidding, or so I thought. When I walked out into the chill night air, I found the parking lot to be completely empty. My wife was visiting her sister for the weekend, so there was no rush for me to get home, but it was getting late. I figured I would grab the dolly from my truck, get the centrifuge loaded up, and then surprise her with it Sunday afternoon. Had I simply loaded up the centrifuge, locked up the storage unit, and went back home, things would have turned out different, and I would have been richer for it. By the time I was back in the storage unit, however, the rush of winning had passed. I wanted another peek at the mysterious objects I had paid for. I promised myself I would only reveal one more object to myself, yet I do not have a good history of keeping promises. Under the first cloth covering, I found a chest-high microscope. Beneath the second, an expensive piece of lab equipment I could not identify. Beneath the third, I found a sort of incubator that had enough circuitry in it to suggest at least another $1,000. Had I turned back home then, had I even a shred of self-control, I would have gone home a wealthy man. Yet, I am a slave to the rush, and the 3 previous finds had whet my appetite, expecting another burst of dopamine. I ripped off the 4th cloth covering. I let out a shriek. As the dirty fabric gathered around my feet, all I could do was stare. I didn't understand what I was looking at, but somewhere deep inside of my chest, I knew I was witness to something patently against the laws of nature. The creature was suspended in a liquid-filled vat. It had 6 legs, a strange vine-like growth stemming from its back, and vaguely, very vaguely, resembled a cat. The thing was presumably dead, yet it was no less terrifying for it. Suddenly, the thought of being alone at the storage facility started to bother me. In an effort to distract myself with more expensive laboratory equipment, I tore down another cloth covering. Instead of priceless scientific instruments, I found a similar vat. I steadied myself enough to not scream, but I was no less terrified. The creature that floated in this one resembled a bear, yet it was no bigger than a raccoon, even in its small size. The floating beast terrified me. Its open maw was filled with a menagerie of misshapen, sharp teeth which looked like they could bite through steel. There was a thick web of skin stemming from the creature's paws, suggesting it once took flight. The beast was undoubtedly not the work of nature. The contents of the storage lot brought forth suggestions of dark science and terrible experiments. The dolly with the centrifuge was right next to me. I could have retreated back home, but instead, in terror, I stripped all the hidden objects of their obscurity. I found a couple more pieces of expensive-looking equipment. They gave me no joy. Even when I found a second, larger centrifuge, I simply went on to uncover the rest of the storage space. I found terrible creatures which will haunt my dreams until the end of time. A sort of crab creature with human eyes upon its shell, a snake with pairs of wings which covered its spine, a glob of grey flesh covered in bug-like eyes and twigs and flowers. There were about a dozen of the vats, and each inspired more discomfort than the last. Above each of the vats sat a sort of designation, GA07, GB028, FI004. The final covering lay on top of a vat, housing a genetic amalgamation I couldn't even begin to describe. Atop of the vat sat a coffee-stained Pokemon notebook. The hybrid encyclopedia. Its title read in neat handwriting. It is only once I opened the notebook that I understood the markings that adorned the vats. They were names. Every page was dedicated to a different creature with rough sketches and neatly ordered notes. The notebook described many more creatures than were present in the storage unit. There were at least 100 pages. I tried to read the entries for the experiments that were present within the vats, but my heart was racing far too much to make sense of the tiny letters on the page. Just as I calmed, just as I centered myself enough to be able to make sense of the mystery I was entangled in, I felt a sharp prick in my neck. "Sorry," said the old man in the ill-fitting suit. "I have tried to warning you." Naturally, I was startled when I first saw him. I did, however, feel a semblance of relief about not being the only one in the presence of those strange creatures. The old man was considerably smaller than me and seemed harmless enough. I thought myself lucky to be in the presence of a man who knew more about these hybrids. That mirage of luck dissipated the moment I looked at the old man's hand. There was a syringe in it. Steadily, a tingling numbness spread from my neck. Before I could even register, I had been poisoned. I was crashing to the floor. With a great grunt of effort, the old man caught me and lowered me to the cold ground. Even though he had just stuck a syringe in my neck, his eyes were apologetic to the point of wetness. "This storage unit belonged to Crazy Man, Professor Willow. He is obsessed." "I am sorry," the old man said, squatting down next to me. "I am sorry, but this storage is important. Willow must be ended. His early research is important. I am sorry." By then, the numbness had spread out all throughout my body, yet my neck continued to throb with renewed tingly beats. With each pulse, my vision grew foggy and the world beyond echoed with distance. I could register the old man depositing the syringe in his ill-fitting jacket and then fishing around for something else. Before his hand emerged again, he was nothing but a vague blur. "It is poison, but it does not kill. I am sorry. You will be fine. I am not thief. I am man trying to helping." Briefly, before my consciousness fully faded away, I sensed something being pressed into my palm. Then, with my thoughts stumbling into nothingness, I passed out. I woke to a phone call from my wife. She had just come home from her sister's, and I was nowhere to be found. From the sound of my raspy voice and my inability to articulate my words, she presumed I had been on a weekend bender. Without giving me a chance to explain myself, she hung up. I was stretched out on the cold floor of the storage lot. My cheeks were covered in drool, and I was next to what I presumed to be a pool of vomit. The fact that I was alive and able to feel my limbs provided a flicker of relief, but the flame was quickly snuffed out. The storage lot was empty. There were still vintage Pokemon posters and calendars over the walls, and none of the toys seemed to have been moved, yet all the expensive equipment I had celebrated so heartily was gone. The terrible monstrosities encased in vats were gone as well, but I did not mourn those. On the mornings when you wake up far from your bed covered in drool, it's usually the money that you mourn. I decided I would not tell my wife how I had spent my weekend. When I came home, we argued, and I let her believe that I had simply spent the weekend boozing. I did, however, insist that I didn't play any cards or gamble in any other fashion. She, after some convincing, believed me. I didn't want to tell my wife about the maddening hybrids. Partially, I did this because she wouldn't believe me. By the time I was back home, I was already working on trying to convince myself that it was all a fabulation anyway. The other reason why I didn't tell my wife, however, was that I didn't want to get into trouble. I did break our budget rule during the auction, and I knew that was a bigger sin than a weekend of boozing. It's not like she would ever find out anyway. The things which the old man told me as I succumbed to whatever paralytic poison he injected me with, I do not understand, and I do not care to explore. In one thing, however, he was honest. The old man was not a thief. When I woke on the floor of the storage lot, I found a crumpled stack of bills in my hand, $640 to be exact, with the toys and posters. I could definitely cover more than the $10 I invested. Though I have witnessed unspeakable crimes against nature, and though I am still recovering from the unknown poison, my finances were still in the black. I met my girlfriend, let's call her Diana, when I was living in a bustling city. She worked at the same office as I did. We had known each other for like a year or two when we started dating. She would tell me stories about her hometown and the paranormal activities that occurred there. She was one of those people who are deeply interested in the paranormal. I did not believe her stories, because I didn't believe in paranormal stuff. She would always look so full of life whenever she talked about paranormal activities or stories she had heard from other people. After a few months since we started dating, she got a job at her hometown and moved there. I wanted to go there with her, but there were no job openings there. Not for the first few months at least. I applied for a few jobs in her town and finally was able to land one. I could not wait to see her again, because I hadn't seen her for months. I remember how Diana and her family welcomed me with open arms when I first entered the town. They fed me delicious food at her home, and I formed bonds with her family. In addition to her parents, she had a little sister who was the world to her. Her sister was called Lily. She was a shy, quiet little girl who barely spoke to anyone. Diana had told me how often Lily got sick, and how no doctors knew what was wrong with her. Diana would tell me how she and her family thinks that something else was causing Lily to get sick so often. On that day when her family welcomed me, her dad Daniel took me into his room. I wondered what he was trying to do. "Son, I heard that you're gonna live in this town," Daniel said, his gaze fixed on me. I nodded in response to his question. "Then there are rules that you must follow." Daniel cleared his throat. "Do not fish at the pier past 12 a.m. in the night. Do not go into the woods past 9 p.m. And finally, do not go anywhere near the beach to the south at sunset." This final rule is one you must never break under any circumstances. I nodded, even though I did not believe him. I believed that everything must have a scientific explanation, and paranormal stuff are made up by people as a way to pass time or for entertainment. After that, I went back to dine with the rest of the family. The rest of the day went normal. Obviously, I couldn't stay at Diana's house, so I ended up renting a place close by to her place. We would go on dates occasionally as I got used to her town. Even though I did not believe her father, Daniel, had said, I avoided breaking the rules he mentioned out of respect for him. One day, when we were on a date at a local cafe, I brought up what her dad talked about with me, his list of rules. Yeah, she said, as long as you are not there at the times my dad mentioned, you're safe. I have to admit, the creepiness of those rules were getting to me. At first, I had thought that this was all a ploy by her dad to get me to break up with her. But seeing as how she herself validated his rules, I was not so sure anymore. As I grew more accustomed to the town, I would go to this beautiful beach to relax. I would use this swing in the woods that led to the beach. I could get a good view of the beach from there. There was always this one kind old lady, let's call her Matilda, who would talk to me whenever she saw me there. She would come there almost every evening to get wood to burn. I enjoyed those days. I enjoyed our conversations. She would tell me stories of the past, about the time when she was young, and at every day, when sunset draws near, she would hurry home after telling me that I should not stick around longer, even though I would have done so without her telling me. And one day, when I was chilling on a bench at the beach at evening, I fell asleep, because I had not slept well the previous night. I had a strange nightmare of an old man strangling me when I was on the bench and woke up. No one was there. It was quiet, with the sound of waves splashing. It was dark, with the clouds in the sky shaded with red. I looked at the time. It was already sunset. All of a sudden, I felt a chill run down my spine, like I was not alone. I quickly got back into the woods to go back home. As I was walking in the woods, I saw the old lady, the same one who would always talk to me in the distance. She was standing completely still, with her back turned. I did not notice it until I got close enough to her. She had no feet, and she was hovering above the ground. She turned around to look at me. Her eye sockets were empty, and she was grinning from ear to ear. It was not humanly possible. The minute that happened, I heard sounds of women laughing from all directions. They sounded hysterical. I covered my ears and turned my eyes away from her. And then, when I looked at where she was before, she was gone. I ran as fast as possible. The laughing voices were still there, echoing from all directions. Their volume did not change no matter how far I went. I covered my ears and made my way towards home. The people on the street shot me weird glances, as though they were staring at someone who went insane. As soon as I entered my house, the laughing voices stopped. It was as quiet as it had always been. I went into my room and plucked the courage to look through GHE window. Nothing was out of the ordinary. I looked at the sunset sky and wondered if this was going to continue. At that point, Daniel's warnings replayed in my head. Don't go anywhere near the South Beach at sunset. I wondered if this was the beach that he had talked about with me before. I was worried about what might come next. I stopped going to that beach, but the feeling was always there. I felt like something was watching me no matter where I went. Sometimes, I would feel someone touching my shoulder or pull my clothes lightly, and no one would be there when I would turn around to look. I did not tell Diana nor anyone about this. I believed that it was my burden, and my burden alone. I did not see the old woman either, for days. Ever since this happened, I used my free time to walk around town. I did not pay attention at the time, but I would never see the old woman when I walked around town. Many days passed this way, without further incident. One day, as I was going back home from work, I noticed the old lady standing there in the woods. She gestured me to come closer, but I was too afraid to go to her. She kept gesturing over and over, but I paid no heed to her. As I passed by her, I gave her a glance. She looked normal, like she usually does. I still could not get over how creepy she looked at sunset on the last day I saw her. Seeing how she looked normal, I told myself that whatever I saw and heard the other day must have been my imagination. As soon as I went up to her, she smiled. "Hey, Sonny," she said. "It's been a while since we last saw each other. How have you been doing?" "I have been fine, I guess," I answered. "Sonny, I have a present for you. Can you come with me?" the old lady eagerly asked. "Sure, I guess," I answered with a moment of hesitation. After gesturing me to follow her, she took me to her house in the town. It looked beautiful, as though it was built yesterday. It was filled with lights. Upon entering her house, I noticed that it was completely empty. "Do you live here alone?" I asked, my tone curious. "Yes, I have a few children, but they are all out of town," she answered. She led me into the living room and gestured me to wait. The house was well lit, with a lot of colorful, small lights. It looked as though the house was prepared for a party. Not too long after, she brought me a slice of chocolate cake. "Take a bite, Sonny," she said eagerly. Without wasting any time, I took a bite from the chocolate cake. But the minute I did that, it tasted like mud, and I instantly spat it out. The old lady was still there, observing me eagerly. She started laughing. "Sonny, take another bite," she said. "It tastes terrible," I said to her. She looked disappointed, and then she took the cake slice and went out of the living room. I was puzzled as to why the cake tasted like mud when it was clearly a chocolate cake. I still had the bad taste of it in my mouth. It was enough to make me feel extremely nauseous. I could not stay there any longer, so I went out of the house and rushed towards mine. I was getting weird looks from people on the street again, like I was an insane person. I could not stop to think about it at the time because I was too nauseous. As soon as I got back home, I vomited in my bathroom on the toilet. I did not look at it and flush the toilet. My whole body felt weak, as though I had a bad fever. I laid down on my bed to rest and fell asleep briefly. I woke up from my phone ringing. It was Diana calling me. I picked up. "Babe, are you okay?" Diana sounded worried. "Yeah, I'm okay. Just feeling a bit nauseous. That's all. I'm feeling better now," I said without thinking. "That's good," she said as though she did not believe me. I sensed that there was something odd. She was unusually silent and did not say anything for a while. "Babe, please tell me the truth," she said, with a serious tone. "What were you doing at the graveyard?" A chill went down my spine. I was genuinely puzzled at her words. "I did not go to any graveyard." "What?" "I didn't go to the graveyard since I came to this town," I said, genuinely confused. "Babe, a lot of people saw you at the graveyard eating dirt," she told me. "You left before anyone could intervene." Hearing this chilled me to my core. Was I losing my mind? Was I actually eating dirt in the graveyard? Or did people mistake me for someone else? Recalling what happened in the past, I came to the conclusion that what my girlfriend was telling the truth. We talked a bit more and she genuinely sounded worried. After that, she hung up the phone. On the next day, as I finished work, Daniel called me and asked me to come as soon as possible. So I went there. I knocked on the front door and Diana opened it. She looked worried. She gestured me to come in, so I went in. She led me into the living room and had me sit down on the couch. She sat right next to me and held my hand tight. A few moments later, Daniel entered the living room and sat down next to Diana. "So, Son," he started, "I hear that you did some questionable things in the graveyard." There was silence in the air. I hesitated to talk. "Well," Daniel broke the silence, "because this happened, you must have stayed on the South Beach at sunset." He was right. I nodded. His expression changed to a slightly angry one. "Son," he said, "I told you clearly, do not stay at the South Beach at sunset." I explained to him what had happened to me there in full detail, as well as everything that happened between me and the old lady. "I see. You've been seeing this old lady almost every evening?" Daniel asked. "Yes. I answered. What did she say her name was? Daniel asked. Matilda, I answered. Daniel's eyes widened. I looked at Diana. She had the same reaction. There was silence for a few moments. Son, Daniel replied. Matilda died years ago. She is my mother, and she is Diana's grandmother. It shocked me to my core. I could not believe it. This meant that the old lady I was talking to all along was Diana's grandmother. Questions popped up in my head, one after the other. Why did the old lady lie about her children being far away if she was a ghost? Was she evil or something? So that's the shape it took. Huh, Daniel said, as though he was talking to himself. What do you mean? I asked him. That nasty thing. It's not real. She is not real. That is only one shape among many others that nasty thing takes, Daniel said. Even my daughter Lily. Daniel suddenly stopped. It's okay, Dad, Diana reassured him, holding his hand. My daughter Lily, Daniel continued. That thing is tormenting her too. We only realized it recently. I was shocked. So the thing that has been causing Lily to get sick all the time was that thing. Almost right at that time, Lily entered the room. She looked at me and smiled. Mr. Humpty likes you, Big Brother, Lily said to me. Mr. Humpty wants Big Brother to hang out with him. Come. Before I could answer, Lily was pushed away by an unseen force, and she started struggling against something on the ground. It was as though something invisible was trying to strangle her. Before we could reach her, she stopped. She had passed out. Daniel took her in his arms as he cried. He was whispering something that I couldn't quite make out. After that, he went out of the room. I could see Diana covering her face with her hands, crying. I tried to console her the best I could. When she finally calmed down, I asked her to tell me everything. She told me what happened. They were having a barbecue in the evening, near the woods with their neighbors. Lily was playing with a few girls her age. When they took their eyes off Lily, she disappeared into the woods. They searched for her all over the place, only to find her standing still at the South Beach at sunset. She had been acting like that ever since that event. She would get frequently sick and would not be able to get out of the house. According to Diana, they were a safe distance away from the South Beach. She had no idea about how Lily went to the South Beach through the woods. There was no doubt in my head about it. Lily went through the same thing I did. Diana also told me that people who have been targeted by the entity see it in different forms. For me, it was in her grandmother's form. For Lily, it was someone divided by something else. Diana told me that someone was brutally murdered by some thugs at the South Beach at sunset nearly 40 years ago. I knew what she was getting at. It was his vengeful spirit that was haunting the South Beach. Obviously, it was a lot for me to take in. My entire world has changed within a span of a few days. Above all, I knew that whatever that thing was, it wasn't done with me. Deep in my heart, I wished that that thing would leave me alone. As much as I did not want to believe that it was real, I did. I wondered why others were fine, even though they went to the South Beach at sunset. Why Lily? To this day, I'll never know. Diana didn't seem to have an answer either. In the following days, the activity intensified. I would hear distant laughing, talking nearly every time I went outside. Activity started happening everywhere except my home. The other day, my coffee mug was pushed by an unseen force, breaking it to pieces when it hit the floor. Another time, I would see shadow figures moving at humanly impossible speeds, so I reduced the time I spent outside. My contact with Diana was very limited. I could not pick up her calls. Even though I knew she was worried, my mind was just too occupied with the activity that was happening to me. The activity at my workplace worsened as I stopped going outside except when I had to work. The shadow figures I would see in my workplace evolved into unnatural entities. One particular day, as I was working past the normal hours, without anyone else but me, I caught something in the corner of my eye. In a cubicle in the same row as mine was a shadow-like face with no features except for its gigantic eye. Only half of its face was visible. I jolted, as if noticing My movement, it put its head back in the cubicle it was in. It was only there for a moment. I did not take my eyes off the cubicle it was in and went up to that cubicle. To my surprise, the cubicle was empty. I was too scared at that point, so I was about to go home. As I reached the exit, I saw a creature, the same creature from before, with its gigantic eyes. This time, its face was visible. It was a distorted face. Its body was like a bodybuilder's. It had 8 legs that on its human-like torso. It looked very much like a spider. Upon seeing it, I heard hysterical women laughing from all directions. At least, that is the thing I remember before fainting. On early morning the next day, I woke up in the graveyard without knowing how I went there. I looked at the visible parts of the street. There was no one around. Figures since it was early morning after all. I quickly hurried towards my house, my body aching with pain. After reaching my house, I decided to call someone, anyone who can help me. I reached for my phone in my pockets, only to realize that it was gone. I was too scared to be outside, so I couldn't afford to go back and search for my phone. So I went inside my house and took a shower. The weight that I had felt the whole time was gone as soon as I entered my room. That was when I noticed the wounds on my body. There were scratches and bruises everywhere. What happened to me last night? I wondered. Still, the image of the spider-like creature lingered in my head. Those gigantic eyes, the distorted face. If possible, I never wanted to see the creature again. After showering, I lay on the bed, thinking. Not too long after, I heard knocks on the door of my room. I opened the door. It was Diana. She looked very worried and sad. She asked me to tell her everything about what has been happening to me. So I did. She called her dad and told him the whole story. She and her dad offered to help me with this situation, and I accepted gratefully. I had heard that Lily went through this similar experience, and with the help of some exorcists, it is not as intense anymore. Ever since that, I haven't gotten out of my house much. I am currently taking leave from work. Thank God for vacation leave. I've seen a few exorcists, but my condition hasn't improved. Every time I go out of my house, I see that spider-like creature in the shadows, looking at me. Sometimes it disappears. Other times, it runs towards me with inhuman levels of speed, and I would faint, only to wake up with scratches all over my body. Oh, and I also figured out that staying in my house keeps it away. So I am spending more and more time in my house. Diana is helping me with food and errands. Thank God I have such a wonderful girlfriend like her. I'm too scared to go outside anymore. At the same time, I am wishing to be rid of this curse. Ghost, spider, or whatever it is. So I'll remain in my safe haven until exorcists are able to get rid of this entity. Back in the year 2000, I used to work at a comic book store. This was at the height of Pokemania, so the place had morphed into a shrine to all things Pikachu, and the store was constantly annexed with screeching children. Life was loud and chaotic and filled with concerned parents. Before every shift, I'd hotbox in my car so that I could stay mellow during the after-school rush. Being 19 and stoned, I'd do my best to avoid any semblance of responsibility and left all the heavy lifting to whoever was on shift with me. For about a month and a half, I got paid to stand around the store and stare off into the ether. With enough complaints from my co-workers, however, a regional manager was summoned to check on the quality of customer service. The moment I walked into the store, I was chastised for coming in late and not looking presentable. The manager was the splitting image of my middle school math teacher, smelled like a dentist's office and clearly had it out for me. She took notes on everything I did and would ask all these super patronizing questions that made me sound like an idiot. Mandy, my co-worker, who was definitely responsible for the majority of the complaints about me, was barely containing her joy. Every time the manager chastised me, Mandy kept grinning this stupid grin that was making it hard for me to keep my cool. In order to look busy and mainly to get away from Mandy, I excused myself to go speak with the customers. That's how I met Professor Henry Willow. Not being a child or a parent, Willow stuck out of the crowd of our usual clientele. I had seen him in the store a couple times before. Small, balding dude in a dress shirt and spectacles. He looked like he was killing time before catching the bus to adult math camp. Willow never bought anything. Every time he'd pop into the store, he would just stare up at the big poster of the 151 Pokemon in complete silence. Sometimes he'd pick up a pack of stickers or trading cards and examine it, but it never held his attention for long. He'd just stare up at that poster with a keen, scientific interest, and then, when he was satiated with the cartoon monsters, he would leave the store. I wasn't certain if I could make the strange man buy anything, but at that moment I was absolutely sure I shouldn't try talking to a child in front of the stern manager lady. In as casual a way as I could muster in my crispy state, I asked the man if he needed any help. At first, Willow just stared at me as if I had arrived from another planet. It was only once his stare had sufficiently weirded me out that he started to speak. His voice was low and he seemed to choose every word with the utmost caution. It quickly became obvious that the man was batshit crazy. Willow told me how he had seen the creatures on the posters before. In his dreams, for well over a decade, he had seen a world filled with Pokemon of flesh and blood. The longer the spectacled man spoke, the more he was getting worked up. I feared a scene, so, to calm him down, I asked Willow if he wanted to buy anything. My question seemed to pull him back from whatever internal wonderland he was traveling. With a hint of embarrassment, he nodded. This was a store, after all, he said. It would be impolite to not make a purchase, he said. I expected the man to grab a pack of trading cards and call it a day, but Willow kept picking away at the shelves until he had a sizable purchase of stickers, cards and books. He picked out the items with a sort of guilt, as if he was paying penance to be in the presence of all these cartoon monsters. Both the manager and Mandy seemed to be in awe of how I got the strange man to buy so much stuff. I, of course, knew my sales skills had nothing to do with the purchase, but I sure as hell pretended that they did. When I rang Willow up, I told him I'd be happy to answer any other questions he had about Pokemon if he ever came back to the store. This wiped the guilt off his face. With a thankful smile, he told me he'd be back soon. I didn't get fired that day. Far from it. In fact, from the day I met Professor Willow, I became the top salesman in the branch. Every day I sold to a market of one, but that singular customer had deep pockets. By the end of the month, Willow owned one of just about every piece of Pokemon merch we carried. He bought all the books and sticker collections and video games. Willow even bought 2 of the overpriced Game Boy Colors and a Game Link so that he could catch all the Pokemon across the different versions of the game. The man was obsessed in a way I had never seen before. He snagged up every new piece of merch like it was a priceless collector's item. But more importantly, he asked questions. He asked very specific questions. Not only was Willow interested in the origins of the Pokemon themselves, he also wanted to know more about the society in which they existed. Who financed the Pokemon hospitals? Where did the profits from the Pokemarts go? Could the fact that all the police officers and nurses were related point to some sort of a monarchical ruling power? With every visit, Henry Willow filled my stoned head with all sorts of theoretical questions about the Pokemon universe. Back then, I didn't make much of those questions. They were strange, sure, but the scientist was keeping me at the top of the regional sales charts and got Mandy to seethe with jealousy whenever she was on shift. Willow was, generally, calm. With tranquil eloquence, the scientist could philosophize about the nature of Pokemon, evolution, or the power hierarchies of the various criminal organizations in the Kanto region. It is only once the topic of the Elite Four and the Pokemon League Championships came up that his voice tensed up. Out of all things Pokemon, it was the championship that seemed to fascinate him the most. He wanted to understand why so much resources and attention were devoted to the Pokemon gyms. He wanted to know how involved the ruling class was in organizing the tournament and what happened to the champions once they had won or, God forbid, lost. Where his voice was calm and measured through most of our topics, the question of the Pokemon Championship would make his words shiver with obsession. I did not understand the man's fascination, but I did not question it. I would simply let him ramble about the implications of a regional Pokemon championship and then happily ring up whatever merch he snagged off the shelves. Willow would ask me questions, but he seldom gave me time to answer. I wasn't a particular Pokemon expert, so it's not like I had much to add to the conversation. To Willow, I presume, I was more of a bouncing board for his ideas, a friendly face that could be paid at regular intervals to listen and nod and assure the man that there is nothing unsettling about his obsession. Willow was definitely strange, but I didn't spend too much time psychoanalyzing him. My lack of curiosity was mainly tied to the fact that I was stoned out of my mind, but Willow also didn't seem to warrant any caution. He was short and lanky and generally timid. He seemed harmless. That was until I suggested a reason for the Pokemon Championship. I had channel surfed past a documentary about human civilization and sports the night prior, and spent a good chunk of my shift thinking about it. When Willow came in for his usual shopping binge and started talking about the Pokemon League, I thought I would tell him what I learned from the documentary. Maybe the Pokemon Championship is a way for the community to celebrate shared ideals and unite all of the Kanto region, I said. I didn't think my comment was particularly insightful. I thought it was just an innocent observation about a hypothetical situation. My comment, however, set Willow off. With madness blazing behind his spectacles, Willow started to ramble. I was right. Apparently, the Pokemon Championship was being used to unite the whole island into a single set of values. The Pokemon Championship was being used to make it easier to rule over the Kanto region. Willow's celebration of finally finding the reasoning behind the fictional universe was exceedingly loud, even for the after-school rush. Both parents and children quickly shifted their attention from the pictures of cartoon monsters to the raving scientist in the center of the store. Willow was loud, but it wasn't just his volume that was bothersome. The way he talked about the Pokemon universe was wholly disconnected from the friendly nature of the cartoon. Willow spoke about a world filled with incomprehensible monsters, about a life suffered in the husk of the old world, about a terrible existence which required a strong hand to keep order. Willow spoke about the world of Pokemon in apocalyptic terms, which made everyone around him uncomfortable. Worst yet, however, the scientist spoke about this broken, ravaged world as an inevitability. Willow yelled about the coming end of days and how the globe would be filled with incomprehensible monstrosities that would have to be tamed through technology. I tried quieting him down, and eventually I did, but the damage had been done. Just as I calmed Willow down to speaking volume, 2 police officers entered the store. Without any hesitation, Mandy pointed out the man to the cops and insisted he be trespassed immediately. I tried sticking up for Professor Willow, but the scattering of parents in the store quickly took Mandy's side. The man was, apparently, dangerous. He, apparently, had no business being around children. I put up a token resistance to the idea of the trespass, but in the end, it was my signature that ended up on the paperwork. I was a bit too stoned and had a few too many grams in my glove box to argue with the cops. Without much ceremony, Willow apologized and promised to never return to the store. Years later, I can still see his sad, teary eyes as he looked back at the shelves of Pokemon merchandise. Years later, I can still see Mandy's stupid, crooked grin. Willow's absence was quickly reflected in my sales figures. Within 2 weeks, the stern regional manager had returned, with me having been the previous top seller in the store. She was much nicer at the start of her visit, with no big spender to save me. However, I was quickly revealed to not be a very good employee. By the time the manager's visit was done, I was certain that I wouldn't hold the job past the end of the week. I left the store that day, wondering about what other gigs I was qualified for that wouldn't mind me being a bit blazed on the job. It's then, as I was heading to my car, that I met Professor Henry Willow once more. He approached me in the parking lot, profusely apologizing. It wasn't until I accepted his apologies at least 3 times that he finally calmed. Once he was sure I held no grudge against him, he revealed the true nature of his interest in the world of Pokemon. He had seen similar creatures in his dreams and visions. That was true. What he never told me, however, was that he was a scientist specializing in genetic manipulation. He had seen unnatural creatures in his dreams, yet in accordance to the dreams, he brought those creatures into reality. The manager's visit had definitely soured my mood, but listening to the lanky man explain how he could create Pokemon, or hybrids, as he called them, cheered me up. I thought he was kidding, so I laughed. Professor Willow, however, found little humor in his subject of study. He claimed that he had been working for months on developing these hybrids and that he had kept some of his samples in a storage facility not far from the comic book store. Willow had worked independently for all of his career, but recently he had come across like-minded scientists out east. He offered to take me to his rented lot at the storage facility. He offered to prove to me that his hybrids were real. The prospect of seeing Pokemon in the flesh was alluring enough, and I was about to accept. Yet before I could agree to join him, the scientist produced Polaroid photographs of these supposed hybrids. He must have pressed around 20 of those flimsy photographs into my hands, but I did not see more than 5. They were far too disturbing. Merely looking at them made my stomach churn, even though I was looking at mere photographs. The freshly sown sweat across my back made me certain I was looking at something patently against the laws of nature. I have done my best to forget what I had seen on those Polaroids, but I recall a strange six-legged cat-like creature covered in thick green vines. I remember an amorphous glob of grey flesh covered in a symphony of bug eyes that seemed to be hiding beneath a layer of shrubbery. I remember a dog, an almost regular-looking dog, engulfed in fire with hot magma dripping from his cheery maw. I rejected Professor Willow's offer to see his hybrids that night, and I do not regret my decision. As lanky and harmless as the man seemed, there was something patently wrong with the creatures he had developed. God knows what would have happened to me had I followed the mad scientist to his storage space that night. It's been well over 2 decades since this all happened, and I try not to think about it. Yet, every once in a while, I find myself wondering whatever became of Professor Willow. I find myself replaying the events of that evening in my head and trying to ascertain how real the creatures that he showed me were. With the pandemic and the wars and the constant nuclear saber rattling over the past couple of years, I find myself wondering how likely it is that Professor Willow's visions of the future will come to pass. I suppose my grandfather had eccentric tastes. The place he called home near the end of his life was a somewhat disturbing property that would surely freak out most people. It was a former insane asylum. Despite its off-putting past, he talked about it like it was the most luxurious mansion you could imagine, instead of being creeped out by it. He was proud to own such a historic old building. He bought it for a very good price, but spent quite a bit on restorations. When he passed away, I was stunned to discover that he left the building to me. A few members of the family were a bit insulted that he gave it to me over them, but most were so unsettled by the place that they didn't mind. I guess I really was his favorite granddaughter. I drove up one day to take a look at the place, tour the building, and decide what I was going to do about the fact that it had recently come into my ownership. At first, I thought there was no way I'd ever actually move in. Arriving at the property, I was confronted with the sandstone monstrosity. The building was tall, towering over the landscape, with ornate windows and Gothic architecture. There was a circular water fountain in front and a large clock tower at the entrance. Inside, there were several long and empty hallways. My grandfather had renovated the opening interior room into a living room and had rearranged things quite a bit. He had changed the doctors' and nurses' areas into his lavish bedroom and guest rooms. The kitchen was fully redesigned with expensive granite countertops. In one room there was even a pool hall. He had really turned this grim asylum into his own personal manor. I was somewhat impressed. At the time, I still lived in a cramped apartment, so this was certainly an upgrade as far as space was concerned. I was pretty hesitant, but eventually I decided to sell my apartment and move in. It might be a bit creepy, but it was much nicer than the place I'd been staying, and there was no way I could pass up on all that space. It's not wise to look a gift horse in the mouth, I suppose. It took some time to get used to it, and heating the place was a nightmare. Whenever I'd walk through the hallways, it'd be freezing cold. However, the bedrooms and other rooms I could heat with fireplaces and heaters. After a while, I stopped seeing it as an asylum and saw it more and more as just a nice house that my loving grandfather had graciously given to me. I was appreciative. This next part is a bit difficult to describe, but I guess it's relevant. I've had mental health issues all my life, on and off. They tend to get worse during periods of high stress, and shortly after my move, I started having a lot of issues at my job and with a few of my relationships. I became very paranoid as a result. I was convinced that someone was poisoning my food, even when I was self-aware enough to know that it wasn't true. It still bothered me and kept me from eating for several days. I felt I was having some sort of psychotic breakdown. Eventually, I sought psychiatric help, and after much assessment, I was diagnosed with schizophrenia. I didn't have any auditory or visual hallucinations, and with the aid of therapy and medication, I was able to keep my symptoms in check and manage it. The irony of living in a former insane asylum at the time wasn't lost on me. My friends morbidly joked that maybe the building was what did it somehow, but of course, I'd had a history of such mental health problems all throughout my life. Thankfully, this was the 21st century, and I was able to receive proper treatment, unlike many of the poor folks who lived their lives in the former asylum that I then called home. It was also a less taboo subject, something to be discussed more openly, instead of locked away behind the gates of hellscapes like an insane asylum. Patients were once stored away from society like a dirty secret and subjected to what would now be seen as horrible medicalized mistreatment. This grim history was all around me and only drove home the point for me what progress we had made as a society and how grateful I was for it. Then something most peculiar happened. One night I was heading to the kitchen to get a midnight snack. I had a blanket wrapped around me while traveling through the cold hallways. While making my way there, I noticed unsettling movement in the distance. The hallway I was in had tall wooden doors along either side, with each one leading to a small room that the patients once stayed in. When I looked towards the source of the noise, I saw a human figure walking out of an open door. The figure moved down the hallway before disappearing through another open door further down. The figure was as plain as day, a person standing there, like you or me, not transparent like a specter in a movie. It was an eerie woman wearing an old-fashioned white nurse outfit. She looked like something out of an old black and white photo. I felt the threatening feeling that a mysterious stranger was in my house. I stopped dead in my tracks. The mind is a weird thing and can play tricks on you. I would know that more than most. At first, I took what I was seeing at face value, but when I thought more about it, I wondered if it could be a product of my mental illness. I'd never had visual hallucinations before, and I'd been taking my medicine. Could I really be seeing this? I thought. Cautiously, I took a few steps forward in the cold, dark corridor. As if on cue, the nurse emerged from the door at the end of the long hallway. This time, however, she turned and faced towards me, staring blankly. Her piercing dark eyes gazed into me. This made my skin crawl. The woman's uniform was a white dress, shoes, and hat. Her skin was ghostly pale. Her short hair was dark brunette. She looked at me for quite a while before a wicked smile began to slowly appear on her face. We both stood transfixed, staring at one another for a moment. Something about the way she was looking at me was very sinister and intimidating. She appeared to be holding an odd, shiny silver medical instrument in her hand, but I couldn't see what it was. The nurse then began walking towards me. In a panic, I ran back into my room and slammed the door. I stayed awake all night. There was no way I was sleeping after that. I waited for daylight. In the morning, I nervously peered out the door but saw nothing. It took hours to gain the courage to investigate the hallway in the daylight, only to find absolutely nothing. No one was there. After that horrible night, I started storing snacks in my room to avoid the empty hallways where I saw the nurse. I still wasn't sure what she was. Given the history of the building, I thought she might be a ghost. But with my recent mental health crisis, there's no way I could be sure. One morning, I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom mirror, trying not to think about what I'd been going through. I suddenly got the uncomfortable feeling that I was being watched. In the mirror, I saw the haunting figure gradually appear behind me out of nothing. With sudden alarm, I dropped my toothbrush and turned around to look, but she was gone. That's when I became really convinced that what I was seeing was a spirit of some kind. But that conviction was hard to hold on to as the days went by. I couldn't trust my own mind to be giving me accurate information on what I was seeing. I just didn't know if this was part of my condition somehow worsening or not. I wasn't sure which answer was more frightening, that my illness now resulted in vivid hallucinations, or that an asylum spirit was pursuing me. Then I started seeing her during the daytime more and more. Sometimes it'd be just for a moment or out of the corner of my eye. Other times I'd see the ghostly nurse going in and out of rooms doing her busy work. She always seemed to catch me off guard. I started closing all the doors, but somehow I'd find them inexplicably open again. The door physically moved. That couldn't be the result of a mental health issue, I thought. Then again, maybe I didn't actually close those doors, but just tricked myself into believing I did. Sometimes late at night when I was getting ready for bed, I'd hear the sound of her nurse shoes walking on the tile flooring out in the hallway. I'd shudder as she drew closer and closer. If she was a spirit, I wondered what she wanted from me. After weeks of being plagued by her mysterious and threatening presence, I decided I had to see my doctor and tell him about this. I told him that I'd been experiencing what I believed to be visual hallucinations. He increased the dosage of my medication in hopes that that would help. It didn't. I continued to see the ghostly woman in the hallways or throughout the building as I tried to focus on my daily life. I'd see her again and again. She just wouldn't go away. Nothing could make her leave. I'd yell out to her in empty rooms, asking her what she wanted from me or pleading with her to please stop and leave me alone in peace. She made no reply. Then one night, as I was sleeping, I grew restless and began to toss and turn. Suddenly, I found myself awake in the dark room. My eyes strained in the darkness until I could make out what I was seeing. My bedroom door, which I had locked, was wide open. The nurse was standing at the foot of my bed looking at me as if I was a patient in her care. Terrified, I screamed, threw the blankets off of me, and ran out of the room. I made my way alone through the chilly hallways to the kitchen and flicked the light on. I stayed in the kitchen all night, guarding the door and looking around the room nervously, waiting for her to spontaneously appear somewhere. I knew I locked that door, with my dosage already increased. Any notion that this was a product of my mental illness went right out the window for me. I needed to research the property more to see if there was any way to figure out what I was dealing with. I knew my grandfather had a binder of information he'd collected on the old asylum. He'd mentioned it to me before. I just needed to find it. I spent the day digging through storage until I finally uncovered it in an old tote at the very bottom of a stack of cardboard boxes. The binder was full of newspaper clippings and documents about the place, from the time it was being built until the time it was closed down and sold. There were even letters and correspondence between staff within its pages. I learned about the grisly history of the asylum and about the poor treatment and dehumanization of the patients there. In order to calm patients down, sometimes they'd put them in ice baths, which were tubs filled with ice to get them to calm down. They also did electroshock therapy on supposedly unruly patients. But the worst of all was the many horrific transorbital lobotomies, which were done with tools resembling an ice pick and hammer. Lobotomies were once considered a helpful form of treatment for various mental illnesses, including schizophrenia, OCD, depression, anxiety, and violent outbursts. Sometimes the patient's relatives just simply didn't want to deal with them for whatever reason, and so they had them committed or lobotomized. Anyone deemed abnormal was at risk. Sometimes this was an easy way for a husband to get rid of his former wife. The procedure essentially resulted in permanent brain damage to the prefrontal cortex and left the patient as a zombified shell of their former self. A steel ice pick was stabbed just below the eyelid into the thin bone inside the eye socket. The end of the long silver ice pick would then be struck with a small medical hammer until the pick cut into the brain tissue. The pick was then moved around from side to side, until it severed the frontal lobe's connection to the thalamus. Their personality, their self, and their ability to make rational decisions were forever destroyed. Sometimes the patients were wide awake during these procedures, and sometimes they died from brain bleeding. The patients were left with vacant expressions and severely blunted or reduced emotions. The doctors found them to be more obedient and claimed to have fewer issues from them. Lobotomies continued in the medical field until around the late 1960s. It was perhaps the worst thing you could do to someone, like killing them but without killing them. I soon learned there was a nurse there who was legendary for the amount of lobotomies she'd given. Her name was Amelia, and if the letters are to be believed, she was not the nicest of people. I was horrified when I turned the page and was met with a photo of the very spectre that had been haunting me, standing outside on the building's front steps with the other nurses. Looking into her dark, hateful eyes, I was sure it was her. Every detail matched. The spirit I'd encountered was the cruel nurse Amelia, who worked here in the early part of the 20th century. Not wanting to be alone or in the building at all after reading that, I asked a close friend of mine if I could come over to her place. I explained some of what I was going through to the extent that I could without seeming too off-kilter. Being a true friend, she agreed that I could stay over for tonight so I wouldn't be so frightened. I wondered how expensive a long hotel stay would be until I could find somewhere else to live. I arrived at her house and we talked in the living room for a while. I showed her the binder and told her about what I was experiencing. It was nice to have someone to talk to, and she made me feel much more comfortable. Getting out of that depressing asylum certainly put me in better spirits as well. Saying all of the story out loud to another person, I began to doubt myself a bit. It all sounded too unbelievable to be true. Suddenly, my friend asked, "Do you hear that?" I listened closely. We both then heard the sound of shoes on hard tiling. It was coming from the hallway leading to my friend's bedroom. She got up to investigate, and I cautiously followed close behind her. Staring down the hallway, we both saw the ghostly figure of a dark-haired nurse. "You see what I see, right?" I asked. My friend, unable to form words, nodded. In the nurse's hands, she held a silver ice pick and hammer. Nurse Amelia just looked at me and smiled a foreboding smile. In that moment, I saw that my worst fears were justified, and there was no longer any ambiguity. I knew then what her intentions were for me, and I knew that I wouldn't be rid of her. She must have overheard me mention something about my diagnosis while I was living in the former asylum. She knew about my condition, and she intended to use her tools to fix it, the old-fashioned way. My aunt was dying. I knew she didn't have long to live, so I traveled out to see her. My boyfriend came along too to give his respects. He was actually already in the area for another reason. It may sound silly to some, but his major hobby is researching Sasquatch, and there had been a few supposed reports in the area that my aunt lived in. We entered the small home to see a few of my other family members already there in the living room. My mother and father were there and understandably heartbroken. My mother looked especially exhausted and was clutching her rosary beads for comfort. My boyfriend and I entered my aunt's bedroom. She looked incredibly weak lying there. My aunt and I never saw eye to eye on many things. She was very devoutly Protestant, not Catholic like my mother. Meanwhile, I was a neo-pagan who worshipped an eclectic variety of ancient gods and goddesses. We were an odd family, to say the least. I didn't know what to say to my aunt, so we made awkward small talk while ignoring the elephant in the room. My boyfriend, lacking social graces, cut in and asked if she'd heard of the recent Sasquatch sightings reported from the nearby forest. I elbowed him as if to say, "Not now." To my surprise, my aunt appeared interested and replied, "Well, I don't know about Sasquatch, but I did have my own mysterious encounter in those hollows. When I was a little girl, I was lost in those woods, and an inexplicable white orb of light suddenly appeared. I followed it, and it guided me back home. I knew it had to be the Holy Spirit." My mother, apparently listening in, appeared in the doorway. "It's true, I saw it myself in the old dark hollow," she added. I thought about it for a moment. It sounded to me a lot like the will-o-wisp in old Celtic lore. "Are you sure it wasn't some kind of fairy activity?" I asked. My mother and aunt looked at me disapprovingly. "There are no such things. Those are all demons in disguise, and they'd never do anything good. This was surely the Holy Spirit or some kind of miracle from the Lord. There is only one God. Anything else is deception," my mother lectured. "How do you tell the difference?" I retorted. "You just do. You use your discernment," she replied. My boyfriend cut in again to add that he had all sorts of odd experiences in the woods looking for Sasquatch. "I've heard knocking sounds on trees, seen glowing eyes in the distance, and once I swear I even saw a man-sized hair-covered thing dart out from behind a tree and disappear into the foliage." My mother and aunt didn't seem very impressed by that. The conversation changed topics from there. We decided to stay the night at my aunt's place along with my mother to take care of her. As we got ready for bed, I couldn't stop thinking about that mysterious light they saw in the forest that had protected my aunt all those years ago. I was sure it must have been some sort of will-o-wisp or forest spirit. I had the idea to go out to the dark hollow at night with some kind of offering to leave out there, something sweet that the Fae would like, such as cakes, berries, or libations. Late at night, when everyone was asleep, I snuck out with a small jar of blueberries and a bottle of wine in hand. I journeyed out into the heart of the forest, where I found a nice spot to make an offering. While pouring out the berries and wine onto the ground beneath a tall old tree, I asked for any spirit dwelling in this forest to help me or guide me to the truth that I couldn't see. I sat a day in silence and asked my questions internally. I felt an odd, almost electrical feeling around me, and I could pick up the smell of ozone throughout the forest, as if after a lightning storm. Why does mankind struggle with the spiritual realm? I thought. How can there be so many interpretations for something as simple as a light in the darkness? I know that faith gives people a sense of comfort, but what's really behind it all? I questioned. I just needed to know. Suddenly, I felt a strange humming in my brain. Through the scraggly trees, I saw a light, dim and distant at first, that grew closer and brighter. Soon the white orb was hovering in front of me, before my very eyes. I watched the light shift and change, ultimately transforming into a large, hairy creature. There stood proudly an 8-foot-tall Sasquatch where the orb had once hovered. I was amazed at what I just witnessed, but this was only the beginning. To my utter confoundment, I watched as the Sasquatch began to inexplicably make the sign of the cross. He lifted his long, hair-covered arm to his forehead, then down to his stomach and across his shoulders, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The beast then seemed to let out a slight chuckle. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Astounded by the sight, I stood to my feet and dropped the glass wine bottle, which shattered into pieces and spilled out onto the forest floor. "Greetings. Do you like this shape?" the Sasquatch asked in a low, eerie tone. The Sasquatch tilted its head sideways as it looked at me. Despite my best efforts, I was stunned silent and could make no reply. "Don't you recognize me? I'm what they're all chasing after. I make the knocking noises heard in the distance," the Sasquatch said. The creature then began to laugh heartily at my frightened and confused expression. The Sasquatch walked around me as it continued to look at me. It was almost dancing in its graceful motion. "Perhaps you'd like this one," it said as it suddenly began once more to transform. The creature levitated into the air, and a purple light emanated from its body as the figure became that of a beautiful goddess. It was Athena, whom I had worshipped before. She was holding her spear and shield. An owl was perched on her shoulder. A sudden sense of awe and religious ecstasy hit me. I was overcome with emotion. "Lift your eyes up to me. Follow her," she said in a commanding and queenly tone. She extended a hand to me and caressed my face the way a mother might lovingly caress her child. I briefly felt my face go numb as she touched me. It felt somehow more real than real. It's hard to explain. It's like in that moment I realized that I wasn't real, and neither was the world around me. But she was. I'd never experienced anything like it before. "You are in my care. You are in my guidance. You have nothing to fear," the goddess said. Every word she spoke I could feel deeply. I had an intense sense of knowing them to be true, a profound sense that I should trust her. I could feel that this entity embodied pure goodness, love, wisdom, and truth. My mind was buzzing. The goddess before me began to shift rapidly. The next thing I knew, she appeared to be the goddess Inanna or Ishtar, then Aphrodite or Venus, then Isis, then Brigid, then Athena again. The shapes moved so quickly that I lost track completely. I've seen you there, at your altar, in the dark by candlelight. All those little statues you collect, just more and more of my faces. Her arms then went out in the cruciform pose, and in a flash of a blindingly bright light, she was gone, now replaced by a new form. There stood a scrawny tan outsider in ragged off-white clothing. His robes began to glow whiter than anyone could bleach them, and a familiar feeling came over me. Hello, my child. Remember me? Now I felt like I was 5 years old again. In those Sunday school lectures I soon grew to despise. You don't hate me now, do you? He said with a half smile. Christ's face then started to warp and change until it was unrecognizable. It cycled through various faces like you'd see in any given crowd, until it seemed to melt and distort into a disturbing mess of features. The being laughed mischievously. See, isn't this fun? I can make you believe every word. I'm pretty good at this. I've been doing it for a very long time. The creature was mocking me. None of that was real, but it had all felt so real. I can get scary too. Just you wait. Suddenly horns sprouted out from Christ's head. A devilish expression took over his face, distorting his caring eyes into a wicked stare and an evil grin. His skin became deep red and his eyes became a charcoal black. Large, dark bat wings extruded from his back, and cloven hooves took the place of his nail-pierced feet. His voice grew deeper as he laughed once again. Every good performer has to play a villain sometimes. A sudden intense feeling that something was horribly wrong came over me. I sensed imminent death. All my hair stood on end. I had the primal feeling of fight, flight, or freeze, so I just stood there frozen still. Once again, I felt the feeling that I somehow knew this being to be pure evil. The only problem was that before I somehow knew it to be pure good. How? I thought, could my perception be fooled like this so deeply? This being seemed to have complete control and command over my emotions and my senses. There was no discerning the truth beyond these intense experiences. Finally, I managed to speak a single sentence aloud. "What are you?" I said with a look of disgust. There aren't good enough words for what I am. I've been fooling humanity since the dawn of society. I ruled Mesopotamia. The Egyptians once carved guises for me and bowed before them. I commanded a civilization from Mount Olympus in many forms. I guided Zoroaster and countless other philosophers and mystics. I told Abraham, if you'll be my people, I'll be your God. So he took that deal. I came to Paul on the road to Damascus as a dead man's apparition and changed his mind. Soon much of the world had entered into my new blood covenant. Those are only a few examples you'd be familiar with. I can't even begin to tell you all the eyes I've pulled the wool over. Why? I asked. Why bother tricking humanity? Human beings have the capacity to imagine, to create cultural structures with me that I can use to influence you. A wolf cannot build a temple to Aphrodite and cannot imagine her form. To use the human mind to establish and perpetuate these customs, traditions, and images by which to control mankind, that is my goal. More accurately, that is my means to an end I can't reveal to you at this time, but that which is mankind's ultimate destiny. I am the ghost of every ghost tale, the chill down your spine when you enter a haunted house, just as much as I am the feeling of the divine in every place of worship. Despite any appearance I may take, I am not your dead loved ones. I simply embody a memory to deceive and manipulate. In this sense, I am everyone's dead loved ones. I'm your friend, your father, your mother. I'm your deity. I'm everyone's deity. I am the UFO of every UFO sighting, the creature of every fairy tale. I have taken you to the fairy realm, to outer space, to anywhere your mind has wanted to go. All I ask for in return is your belief, your faith, and ultimate ownership of your species. I'm not human. I don't have any morality. That's a game your species has invented. I've watched countless civilizations come and go. I watch human lives twinkle in and out of existence like blinking lights. Sometimes I play you against each other. Your species is a plant that I water with deception until the day that it has fully grown for its greater purpose, for its apotheosis. It's fitting that some people these days call me their shepherd. To me, you are property. I collapsed to my knees, overwhelmed by it all. I started crying and sobbing. Thank you for the offering. I hope I've answered your questions to the best of my ability. Tell your mother to keep praying those prayers. It feeds us. With that, the creature vanished right before me. Perhaps, I thought, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing us that we had a choice, or that there was an alternative. But what I saw wasn't the devil. That's just one name from one version of one story. There was no true word for what it was. An intelligence with 1,000,000 names has no true name, and a consciousness with 1,000,000 faces has no true face. After taking quite a while to compose myself, I left the forest and returned to my aunt's home. In the morning, my aunt's condition took a turn for the worse. We had a little heart-to-heart, and I told her that despite whatever differences we'd had, I truly loved her. We sat a day in silence for a while after that. Throughout our conversation, she appeared to be in horrible pain and barely hanging on. Then, suddenly, a peaceful expression went across my aunt's face and she smiled. I feel a bit better. There's someone else in the room with us, she said, looking to the corner as if she was seeing something. I turned but saw nothing. Who is it? I asked with hesitation. It's Jesus, she said happily. A chill went down my spine. Hours later, she slipped away, and I wept bitterly. We're partway through summer, and they haven't returned in a month and a half. They won't answer their texts, and location services are off. Since middle school, we three have been inseparable, and I can't shake this nagging feeling that something terrible has happened. Mike's parents spoke to the police, but his mom was in hysterics and attacked a police officer. According to his father, they haven't been able to find anything. My other friend's parents are out of the country and can't be contacted until they return to the States. It feels like no one is helping, and I have no choice but to try to track them down myself. Grim left his laptop at home, and I have some hacking experience. I broke into the laptop and found a file linked from his phone to the iCloud. It's encrypted for some reason. He was a paranoid fucker. I'm leaving his writings below. Maybe you can read through them and find something to help me with my search. I'm not a very good reader. CL. The tunnels. Across the world, every culture has stories that overlap. First-hand testimonies to the evil of the world that has been slowly drowned with time. Shadow people, Jinn, the Hat Man, and so many other names we've given to the dark and evil omens of the world. They knew something we had forgotten. We may have remnants of these testimonies, such as fear, somewhere in our minds. The primal, blood-curdling feeling of dread and terror, the nightmares and dreams we are plagued with. Maybe they all mean something more. I just finished my first year of college. The wonder and awe of the first year slowly dwindles in my eyes as reality sets in. 3 more years. The same mantra got me through high school, but now I have to pay for my classes. Finals week has come and passed, and all I feel is exhaustion, discouraged and unmotivated. I'm counting the days until the next move, until the showers. I never knew exactly why the story caught my attention, other than the fantastic writing and realistic imagery. There was something else about it, something familiar. Soon after, I must have read it hundreds of times. Something always drew me back to it. Nothing looked good to watch, nothing good to read, nothing good to eat. Just a charming little story of Hastings, Nebraska. It took over my every waking thought. The cult, the story. Could it be true? For anyone who doesn't know, let me catch you up to speed. In the early 80s, the world was very different, and that was especially true for rural America. We experienced the largest farming crisis since the Great Depression. God's ire was felt through barren fields and famine. Debts were high, and so was the dread in the air. With every underwhelming yield, the tidal wave of despair grew ever more ravenous. An estimated 300,000 family farmers defaulted on loans, and 250,000 went out of business. Amongst the once vibrant, blessed, and healthy fields walked a 34-year-old with a Bible and a joint. Michael Wayne Ryan was a truck driver with a wife and children, but throughout his life, he never found anything meaningful. Soon, he hurt himself and could no longer work, so he took to marijuana and spiritualism. Unfortunately, he found himself in the Christian identity movement, a belief steeped in anti-Semitism and racism. They prayed to Yahweh and kept kosher like his chosen people, and that's all they could talk about, how they were the chosen ones. Michael went as far as to say the spirit of the archangel Michael possessed him. In his mind, his righteous war against the serpent seed had just begun. They began prepping for the worst, burglarizing houses to support themselves, and amassing as many weapons as possible. James Thim, one of Ryan's old friends, invited him to stay on his pig farm, and this was the base of operations. Ryan's madness continued as he claimed to be king, and after taking multiple wives, doubts rose in the cult. 2 cult members were demoted to enslaved people, chained and shackled to the porch, and made to copulate with an innocent goat and sodomize each other as divine punishment. One of those members was Rick Stice, the father of 5-year-old Luke Stice, whose torture and suffering cannot and will not be forgotten. I pray for young Luke's soul. The only pure and innocent hope was snuffed unapologetically, and the mask of sanity removed. His paranoia overcame him as the father of Luke fled the compound. He escaped, which would only go on to fuel Michael's wrath. The other slave, James Thim, was accused of poisoning a turkey eaten at a communal meal. He was taken to the pig pens he used to use before becoming kosher, and here he would endure one of the worst deaths I've ever heard of. Ryan and 4 other members, including Ryan's own 16-year-old, were told to sodomize James with various tools, whip him 15 times each, 75 times, and shoot off his fingertips on his left hand. Ryan wanted the worst for himself, so he broke his arm and removed his pound of flesh with a razor blade and pliers. Then he had his son and another member break his legs before Ryan stomped in James's chest and ribs before finally granting him the grace of death. He commanded one of the members to shoot him in the head, and just like those before him, he was buried in an unmarked grave. Soon after they were caught stealing and arrested, Ryan was given the death sentence and believed himself to be in the grace of God till the very end. I sit behind my desk, the LED screen flickering off my eyelids as they drift open and close. The last of my candle slowly flickers out, turning into a trail of smoke. The lingering notes of the previous audio episode of my favorite story fading into the background as the abyss takes me. Have you ever been to Broken Bow, Nebraska? I find my mind drifting, slowly escaping me and traveling north. Cornfields, nothing but cornfields for miles and miles. No matter how far or how fast you travel, you can't escape the cornfields. Cottages and farms pass underneath as my consciousness is dragged along the highway. The actual size and scope of the Corn Belt can't be understated. Sometimes, when driving through America, there are moments when you are driving through nothing but corn for hours on end. You could drive for 10 hours in one direction and still see nothing but corn. It's hopeless, inescapable. In there, we're a drop of water in the ocean. In there, we are just another part of the food chain. Down a dirt road, my consciousness blew up dust, across more corn, and then wheat, refurbished and freshly painted. A lone shack stood beside the road, an ominous omen compared to the waste around. I put my hands in my pockets and began to walk. To my left, an apple orchard, wide and long, with every glance. It became more and more inviting. The trees were littered with all the colors of apples you could imagine, from green to red to gold. It was beautiful and alien, a sore thumb in rural Nebraska. Red and pink apple blossoms waved in the breeze with temptation in the air. It smelled sweet. To my right, the simple and mundane wheat above the field. The gold noble stalks rose and fell in waves with the wind. I continued a mile down the road, and I started to feel cold. I could see the sun glinting off the golden fields, but couldn't feel the warmth. Clouds clutter the sky behind it, and all vegetation seems to diminish in the lifeless atmosphere of the silo. A clean, modernized shack lay next to it, almost an afterthought. The lights remain on inside, and a tiny raindrop hits me. It's stinging my face with the cold. As I began to feel the hopelessness wash over me, I felt my consciousness being retaken, up and up to the top of the silo. It was a faded red with a stainless steel cap, and the wheel lever turned clockwise. It opened slowly, creaking loudly. The smell hits me, an acidic, rotten, iron-pungent smell hits my nose and commands me to vomit. But I don't give in. I can see clearly, but the light that filters in reveals a pool of gore. Pieces of worm-like meat lay on the floor amongst thick, dark blood, with a light red film on top. Bones and teeth are scattered amongst the other unidentifiable body parts. I lean in, on the far end of the silo, away from the light filtering through the hatch. I could see something moving, a glinting metal contraption slowly grinding. Low rumbling noises can be heard through the silo, as well as an electrical humming, the kind that could drive you insane, piercing your ears. As the sound of the creaking hatch settles and my eyes start to adjust, my first impressions are over. An elongated pale arm connected to a massive bony body with pale white flesh drags something toward the metal contraption. Quiet sobs like those of a child can be heard, and as the creature lifts its bounty, it's a child, I think. Its face is malformed, and in between its lifeless, pale blue, beady eyes was a pig's nose. Its torso was separated from its waist, its guts and intestines dripping and swaying as it was being carried. Its lifeless eyes gazed out at the light offered by the hatch, almost mesmerized. I stare silently, unable to take my eyes off it, equally horrified, disgusted, and intrigued as to what would happen next. The lumbering, pale creature lifts the child with one arm, dangling it over the contraption. Below him, the machine hummed. As my eyes adjust, I can see steel spinning cog-like wheels below him, hungry and eager. I stare at the child, unable to scream, unable to yell, just a tortured observer behind my own eyes. I will myself to look away with all my might, but my eyes set on the pitiful sight of the deformed child. Instead, something else happens. The gaze of the child shifts from the gore bathed in light to match mine. As I stare at him, he stares back, and a look of wrath and fear takes over his face as he begins to squeal and scream. The sound is unique and terrible. It still haunts me, a sound only a true abomination could make. The creature holding it looks up, its lightless black eyes reflecting my own. As it begins this guttural screech, neither broke eye contact. The baying of an injured dog echoes. It whines and screams, growing louder, mixing with the horrid screaming and squealing of the child. As the horrid cries continue, the other voices rise as if they echoed through a vent. The slow build-up of countless screams of children and the dreadful sound makes my ears bleed. I can feel my body go limp as I plummet forward into the gore below. The screaming grows louder and more desperate, and the smell grows even more foul. I wake up retching. The putrid vomit hits my throat and burns. I can't help it. I look around frantically. Something in my mind tells me I'm being watched. I stumble toward the bathroom and slip, smashing my head against the wall. I lay in my misery for a minute and slowly rose to my feet. Hastings. It began taking up more and more space in my mind as the weeks went on. Ever since the video, ever since the story, ever since I was 8 years old, I would wake up screaming and crying from night terrors. The room was cold and silent as my adolescent self sobbed out of fear. My ears were still ringing from the shotgun that had killed my parents. In my dream, of course, these nightmares became weekly, and I felt as if my mind had turned against me. Every culture worldwide has stories of the terrors of the night. The monsters hiding just behind the curtain of light, the monsters that lurk inside us, the truth of our violent and carnal nature. I have never trusted my dreams, nor believed they meant anything. But something about this morning isn't right. Last week, I finished my final exams for college, and summer has just begun. I moved away from my family home in California to be with my girlfriend, Maya. We just had our first anniversary, and ever since I moved, I've been doing well, not just in school, but also in making healthier habits and finding myself. Now, my desk was littered with food bags and empty drink containers. A sweet lavender scent from the candle I burned last night hung in the air. Ever since I started researching this story, it's been like this. I found a fragment of truth in the showers, and the Yahweh cult has haunted my thoughts and even more my nightmares. I have been telling my best friends, Michael and Maya, about it non-stop for 2 weeks, and they both have told me we should all go on a road trip there. My stomach feels like it's about to burst. I can't tell if it's my nerves or just because I haven't had anything but 2 cups of coffee and a Red Bull in the past 14 hours. My girlfriend sleeps peacefully beside me, and the loud snoring from the back is low and deep, like a slumbering giant. We started in Southern California, picked up Mike, and headed north. I stopped to sleep 6 or 8 hours after starting, but even then, I could only sleep an hour or 2. I could smell the corn, see the mesmerizing golden waves of wheat, feel the humid, sickly heat, and taste the blood. Since then, I haven't gotten a wink. I have to discover the falsity of my fear, and then maybe my thoughts will be my own again. Baby! Can we go to the bathroom? Maya crawls out from her slumber beside me, her face as adorable as ever. Of course. Love. There's an exit in half a mile. Be quick, I replied, slightly thankful for the opportunity to get another energy drink. We got off in between the major cities on some back road. There was an old gas station and a shack amongst the green farmland advertising raspberry smoothies. If you've been around farmland, you know that sometimes the producers set up a shack and sell goods directly from the producers. I parked at the gas station, and as Maya rushed out of the car door, I walked down to the storefront. They seemed overly lovely people. Maybe it's the charm of the Midwest. But they asked me about my day and where I was going, and I realize I don't have the specifics to any of the questions. The red brackish sludge in the paper cup smelt fantastic. It was smooth and creamy and had the right amount of sweetness. As I looked down into the cup, the red gloop sloshed, the chunky texture hugging the cup. Nausea creeps to the back of my throat. I ran into the side of the gas station, sprinting for the bathroom entrance, barely holding onto my stomach. I shoved past a man on his way out and threw up into the trash can in the next chamber. I could smell the stench of the truck stop bathroom, which didn't help the nausea. A headache as the nauseating stench makes me retch violently. All I could think of was the viscera-covered floor of the silo, the creature, the child's eyes. I shook the thought, my head throbbing with pain as the room spun. I looked in the mirror, and instead of puke running down my mouth, it was stained with blood. It drips down my neck, warm and putrid. I glance up. The nose of a pig. I blink it away, grab the paper towels, and wipe myself down. Tears gather, and I sob lightly. I don't want to keep going, I say to my girlfriend when I return to the car. Mike was passed out, and with me vomiting and having a headache, I just felt like turning around and heading home. My girlfriend had other plans to see this through for us. For me, she took over driving for the next length of the journey, and I passed out in the passenger seat soon after. Wake up, baby, her sweet voice called to me from the blackness of my unconscious, like the graces of God washed upon me. Her warmth and the sweet smell of vanilla and cinnamon hit me when she embraced me. I don't deserve her. I'm up. Darling, did we make it to the hotel? Yes. Baby, let's get going before it starts raining. I opened my eyes as she let go of our embrace. The horizon line was empty and flat in all directions, and the underlying beauty of the sunset peeking out from a cascade of clouds filled my eyes. A storm was coming. There is beauty in the dangers of life, the ocean, space, and caves. The less we know and the more infinite something is, the more beautiful it becomes. This sunset was no exception. The light was fading fast, hiding behind the earth, and I could feel the biting cold of the drizzling rain above. Utah. Maya heads to sleep while Mike and I are wide awake. I saw him unpacking his clothes and taking out his gardening bag. "Are you going for a smoke?" I shot him a knowing glance while grinning. "Yeah, you comin'." He held up his bounty. A small hand-rolled joint, pure white. Of course. We made our way to the lobby to look around. We stepped through the lobby. It was dead quiet, with no one around. We stepped out under an overhang for cars to unload luggage and lit up. Mike took a long drag and blew a cloud of white smoke before looking my way with a raised eyebrow. "So, first day in, how are you holding up, Mr. Dreamer?" He looked at me, amused with himself. "Well, I'm alive, aren't I?" I chuckled and held out my hand for him to pass it. He reached over. "No, thanks to that raspberry smoothie. What was there rabbit piss in it?" He jeered at me. He was met with a swift retort of smoke in his face. "Yeah, except you would have begged me for a taste if that was the case. You freak." I chuckled, coughing. "It would remind you of that one ex." I teased him before passing. "You're one to talk. You kiss the ground Maya walks on. Well, at least she doesn't make me drink the special juice." I gave him a side eye before slapping his shoulder. "Cheer up. It's not that bad. She could always have pegged you." "Oh, that's gross. Dude, it wasn't like that anyway. Tinder has been pretty dry, though. Don't worry. Bro, you'll find a match. The closer to Arkansas, the higher your chances." I laughed. And he did, too, as the embers fell to the wet pavement. The sounds of the rainstorm enveloped everything around us, and rest came to us in the late hours of the night. I can hear the AC running. An obnoxious low hum fills the room as the radiator leaks cold air with a hiss. I can't feel Maya next to me. She must be in the bathroom or something. I slowly open my eyes, groggy and exhausted. The blank, plain ceiling was only disrupted by the shadow of the spinning fan. It is ominous, spinning and spinning, uncaring and unfeeling. I could feel a skittering up my thigh, slowly making its way under the covers and up my arm. I can't move. I could feel my heart beating faster and faster. I tried to get up, but my body wouldn't let me. I want to scream. I want to take this thing off of me and kill it. But my body won't let me. My neck muscles won't listen, and my mouth isn't there. The bug continued uncaring, crawling up my arm and shoulder, approaching my neck, and crawling on the sensitive skin. I want to throw up. It crawls toward my ear, and I feel 3 more skitters across my body, my left leg, right foot, and right hand. The one near my face continued up toward my ear, not stopping. I could feel them all, the horrible legs, their vile forms defiling me in my conscious prison. I'm going to be sick. More and more began crawling up me. 4, 12, no 30. More. They begin encasing me, and cockroaches run across me head to toe, biting at my flesh with millions of sharp pinches in broken harmony. The one burrows deeper into my ear, deeper and deeper. It was the single most painful thing I had ever had to endure. I could feel the wall of my ear being chewed away, the legion swarming my body and consuming me. It made its way to where it was warmest, most wet, my brain. I woke up gasping for air. "Baby!" Maya called up to me as sweet as a kitten, cold sweat dripping down my back and face. Yeah, I'm right here. Love, it's okay." I sighed exhaustedly, my heart racing and my head aching worse than ever before. "I'm gonna go to the bathroom. I'll be right back." I got up and lumbered through the foreign darkness to the bathroom door. I stepped in, closed the door, and turned on the light. What the actual fuck? My eyes had dark circles more pronounced than yesterday, and I looked paler than usual. Those drugs can't have been good for me. I splashed my face with cold water and let it drip down my chest as I Saturday on the toilet, trying to collect my thoughts and calm down. Another 8-hour drive today. I was still groggy from my jarring morning, but I still pressed on. The road disappeared beneath me, time losing meaning as it does in the usual road trip fashion. We were going from Salt Lake to Denver. The early morning air was thick with fog. We planned on getting there a little early so we could enjoy the city a little. Then it was just one more day till we arrived at our destination. The nervousness was thick in my stomach, and I was equally horrified and ecstatic to get this over with finally. The conspiracies and theories have consumed me for the past few months. I just couldn't understand why nobody was talking about it. I had gone over the history of Broken Bow repeatedly, rereading the stories until the words lost all meaning. It was ingrained in me now. Every letter of every report, every little detail swept under the rug. No one cared. At least that's what it seemed like if the depravity and demonic nature of the place was really true. It has to burn. Road signs flew past us. It's a straight shot to Denver. The same highway for 8 hours can get boring, so my mind drifted. Thunk. What the fuck was that? My girlfriend rose from her previously peaceful sleep like she was awake the whole time. I don't know. Hold on. I pulled to the side of the road, slowing down quickly as she jumped out to see what it was. Her shoes hit the ground, and I heard a high-pitched gasp. Babby. It was a bunny. I could hear the tears in her voice. She was always so empathetic. That's one thing I love about her. She loves all life. So much so that she wants to be an environmental science major. I walked the perimeter of the car, seeing the blood on my wheel and the mess in the road. I'm sorry. Love. It came out of nowhere. We should keep going, though, to make good time. She gasped again in defiance. No, we have to bury it. Why are you in such a rush? You haven't stopped to go shopping with me or scenic stops. The least you can do is help this bunny you killed for the sake of making good time. I took a deep breath, heavily laced with aggravation, and walked to the trunk. There were piles of bags and suitcases for the trip. Under it was an old metal baseball bat and a shovel. I scraped the reminisce off the side of the road as best I could. The smell wasn't great, and flies were already starting to gather. I dug a shallow hole and flattened the mound of dirt. Maya stuck a nearby pretty rock and some wildflowers she took quite a while to find while I was scraping. She closed her eyes for a moment, losing herself in her mind, wishing the animal well. She opened her eyes, and I held her gently. I'm sorry. Baby, I love you. I'll be more careful. I promise. She nodded. Maybe it was the sluggishness of the hangover, or perhaps the guilt from hitting the rabbit. But as nausea climbs up my throat, I quickly pulled away from her and puked. Oh my God. Baby. I lurched over, and I could feel another presence. Something malevolent. Something basking in my suffering. Out of the corner of my eye, I could swear I saw a man, inches away from my face, smiling at me, unmoving but breathing hard. Such a gleeful smile, like a little kid. Watching closely as I emptied my stomach, both sick and terrified. I'm okay. I just am a bit nauseous. I practically crawled back in the car, the comfort of sitting the only thing to calm my stomach, and Maya gave me some water. The rest of the trip was mundane. Mike lit a cigarette. He opened the window, and the sweet tobacco wafted through the air. It was so beautiful out here. The mountains, the grass, and even the sun felt different, warmer, more welcoming. After you sleep on a couch in Las Vegas for 6 months, everything just seems a little brighter. A gentle, rhythmic buzz comes from that back seat, and Michael groans as he takes his phone out of his pocket. Hi, Mom. Yeah, everything's good. It'll take just a few more hours till we're there. Yeah. Love you too. He quickly hung up and took a drag of his cigarette. Well, that fills today's quota. His mom has been calling 3 times a day since we left, but she's always been a little off the rocker when it comes to him. My parents live in Southern California. Life was excellent there, and my high school experience was nothing special. I was raised Jewish. My father and his parents were, so naturally, I would be at the temple every Sunday, up until my bar mitzvah. That is, it was fun, but nothing special. I was too young to glean wisdom in tradition and history. I came to appreciate it later after reading about other religions and history later in my life. My beliefs as a kid comforted me when it felt like there was nothing else. I never quite got along with my mom. My brothers and father were fine, but she was always the one I clashed heads with for various reasons. Mike was the only reason I was able to get by as a kid. I hated home, and his place was my second one. After that, Maya brought me meaning. I hated people and most of the things in life until I learned how to love the beauty and futility of our struggle as people, always trying to be better and do better. Maya always tries her hardest whenever she chooses something. She puts her heart and soul into it, and when she fails, it hurts and is hard, but if she loves it, she always perseveres. She's constantly learning new things and skills, spending time outside, and listening to music. She loves life and the world. I admire that. I never had the same passion for life. I don't like people, and I have anxiety, but I love to create and care for the things around me. That must be what she sees in me. I'm so thankful for her. I'd do anything for her. I'm grateful for Mike, too. He's always there when I'm in need, at least when his mother lets him. I'm glad they're with me. Sunset slowly crept up, a grand show of colorful colors on the horizon. We made several bathroom and food stops, but finally, here we are. While we were coming into town, there was a sleepy ghost town vibe. It's a tiny town, the kind where they knew if you weren't from around there. There were a lot of eyes, and people kept staring at us. The town was likely a popular truck stop. Gas stations and food establishments crowded the main street, but the people were warmer than I expected. Some kept their heads down while others stared. Maybe it was the California plates or the sunburst orange car. I wouldn't say I liked it. Maya found a cute restaurant to get some food in before we went to the hotel, and we found parking on a side street. It was called the Bonfire, and it had a wooden sign with a bit of a bonfire design. It had a small town charm that little holes in the walls often had. It was a local place, and a lovely old lady sat by us and handed out the menus. There were 7 items, and all of them came with fries. Maya got a burger, Mike got the strip steak, and I got a garden salad. Food came quickly, and the water was with them. The waitress put them down and said, "If y'all need anything else, I'll be right over there." "Okay." She pointed to an empty booth across the floor. We said yes and thanked her. We finished quickly, and I put down $40, thanked the waitress, and headed out the door. We are staying in the Copstone Hotel, which is adorable and comfortable. The fireplace in the lobby is lit and warm, like a beacon in the cold, damp summer air. We could feel the humidity shifting, but haven't thought about it as much as we do now. The air was thick and sticky. Sweat was beading off of us. The decor was homey, wooden chairs, leather couches, and all ranch-style furniture. The lady behind the front desk was in her late 20s, and she spoke as I approached her. "Hello, sir. What is the name for the check-in?" "Grim." "Ah, there you are. Your room number is 23. Enjoy your stay." She smiled, and I took the key. "Thank you. Come on, baby." She was half unconscious as she held my arm. Food always makes her tired. I laid Maya to bed and went to the bathroom with my laptop to start reading the local news. The screen glows in the dim bathroom. The only light was an old, warm-toned light bulb that buzzed gently. Local Walmart shot up in robbery. Bed and breakfast 60th anniversary. "You're going to die here." As I scroll past, my vision goes blurry. A familiar headache creeps in. I close my eyes and recoil as pain shoots through my head. "Jesus Christ," I mumble as I refocus on the screen. Runaway cattle topple cars. I close the tab and open YouTube. "We've been waiting for you. Piggy." I heard a cold whisper low and gravely, like a beast speaking our language. Its breath is freezing on my neck, and I swear I feel its nose touching me. I screamed. I jumped and bumped my head on the towel rack above the toilet, my laptop clattering to the ground as the lights went out. "Baby." I could hear my girlfriend calling, but something was off. The light from the laptop showed up and onto the mirror from the floor. "Baby." The high pitches of her voice broke, and I could hear an unnatural resonation. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. It was as if it were in my head. "Baby." Her voice broke as the entity's growls broke through under its mockery of her. It got closer and louder. I looked at the shower curtain lit up from the light in the mirror, and a bloody pig's head sat above the curtains, mouth agape. I woke up on the toilet, laptop on my lap, and my neck aching. Babby, I have to pee. One sec. Lovely. I quickly stand up, get myself sorted, and leave. You were in there forever. She looked irritated and grumpy, as she always was after she woke up. I rubbed the back of my head. It ached. Sorry. Baby. I fell asleep. My neck hurt, and I kissed her on the forehead on my way out. I went and laid down on the bed and was out soon after. The bottomless abyss welcomed me once again to the infinite darkness. Sleep. The dull cool of the inky black around me. I turned around, and a deer was chewing something on the ground 50 feet away from me. Hello, I say. It stared into my eyes expectantly. Hello, I say louder. It paced back and forth, its elegant tan form bright against the inky darkness. I focused in my mind on my response, forming my lips carefully. Hello, how are you? I say, and it stops, and its gaze locks with mine. Oh, I am wonderful. It has been so long since I've had visitors. How are you, child? It slowly stands up and morphs into a form comparable to a human form. Although the head of a deer remains, the arms, legs, and body contort. I'm good. It's been a few days on the road, so my rest is welcome. I respond. I try to bend my mind around, turning the inky blackness into a warm field. The figure Saturday in a leather seat across from me. This is a nice place. My child, tell me, what do you want by coming here? He drank from a gold goblet, his pupils black, the stag jaws taking in greedy gulps. I need to see it. I need to know that it's not real. I need the dreams to stop. I need true sleep. My true feelings flowed out of my mouth without me thinking. I wanted out, but something was holding me in place. Good, good, my child. You will see soon. Have patience. The invitation must be accepted. He put the goblet down and stared at me with empty animal eyes. Can we come in? His stag face grew into a cartoon smile. His lips peel against his face. It is synthetic, like a wax figure pulled with a string, forced into an antagonizing grin. Fear fills me, pouring into my stomach and creating a heavy pit in my stomach. I want out. I force my gaze downward, and a field appears below me. The distant sun is showering golden light so bright that it makes the cornfields glow. As I stared into the light, my surroundings dulled, my dream blurred, and a ladder was extended from the light. I put my hand on it. Maya's face stared back at me, her eyes unopened, and my body was uncomfortably sweaty. I Saturday up, trying to control my breathing. I'm so tired of these dreams. My doctor said the pills would help, but they make me feel fuzzy and blurry. It doesn't stop the visions, the painfully sleepless nights. My mind just won't quit. I got up and made my way to the bathroom. I shampooed and cleaned, exited the bathroom, and heard Maya's sleepy voice. Baby, Maya's sleepy voice greets me. Good morning. It's time to get up. The free breakfast ends at 9, I said, and she practically squealed with excitement and started to get ready. I'll meet you downstairs. Baby, I'm going to get Mike. Okay. I headed across the hall and knocked 3 times. The door squeaked open to a dressed but disheveled Michael. Hello there. I greeted him. Good morning, sir. Would you like to go for a dubious smoke? He is entertained. The best mood Michael could be in. Of course. Lead the way. He walked out of his room, and we quickly marched to the car and lit up. I haven't been able to sleep for shit. Bro, I'm so tired. I say admittedly. Bet you're glad we're not doing a huge drive today. Though, fair. I hope it is all going to be over soon. I took a long drag and passed it to him. What are you talking about? He grabbed it from me. I've been having vivid dreams again, and debunking this should help, I think. I hope. I opened the door and started back inside since Maya would be there soon. We met in the lobby. I saw her eating waffles with a plate piled high. She made me smile just by being with her. Mike came and got his food. Sausage and eggs. I got coffee and began planning the day's journey. I sat down with my laptop and started researching, checking every resource I had to find the pig farm's address. I only saw a little, but it was a road name, Obsidian Drive. I found it on Google Maps and closed the laptop. Mike finished his food, and Maya was halfway to a food coma, leaving a 1/4 of the original waffle size. All right, let's go. I got up and threw away my empty coffee cup. Mike and Maya followed after me, and I made my way to the car. I got in and set up my maps. It's just a matter of time now. My brain ached from last night, but I didn't care. I needed to be free of this burden. The drive started with the repetitive miles upon miles of cornfield. We turned down Alabaster Drive, the road never ending. We had been driving on this road for about 4 hours now, but no sign of significance. Baby, I think we've seen this already. Are we driving in a circle? Maya groaned. Exhausted and a little annoyed, I looked out the window and there was a little red shack. Though, that did look somewhat familiar. I don't think so. Love, everything just looks the same out here. I chimed back. All this corn and still world hunger. That's crazy, Mikkel says as he emptily gazes out the window. I laughed and shook my head. We can't even feed corn to hungry people. We don't digest it fully. Maya looked over with a thinking face. Well, that's ironic. I smiled to myself as I responded. It's American. We pick the most unhealthy fruit we possibly can and make it an industry. Vitamins, nutrients, minerals, and we choose to consume corn syrup. Truly, it's gross. I thought about all the different candies, sodas, and other confections we make with corn syrup. Mike took a hit of his vape. Only here could we grow diabetes. I laughed, and my attention shifted. I could feel the world slow down around me. An elk stood in the middle of the road, inevitable and built like a house. I slammed on my brakes and swerved to the right, nearly sending us into the cornfield, but stopping just short as my panicked breathing started up. Maya and Mike shrieked as we stopped just short. What the fuck, babe? Maya socked me in the shoulder with a dull thud. Ow, damn it. There was something in the road. I looked back, expecting to see the elk, but all I saw was the calm breeze blowing the corn to and fro. I didn't see anything. Be more careful next time. She looked at me with confusion mixed with anger. Sorry, baby. We're almost there. Promise. I started driving again, getting back on the road. The sun was hot, beating down on us a little after midday. The more I went, the more the road narrowed somewhat. Maya fell asleep, and there were no other cars on the road, so I wasn't worried. It was about 4 p.m., and the road just kept getting more narrow. The corn hugging the sides of the road groped the car as we drove in, the leaves encasing us as we went deeper. Jesus, dude, this road is fucked, Mike said, observing the landscape as I swerved potholes. If you weren't careful, you could easily drift into the corn. I saw golden wheat fields, to either the left or right. Beautiful, waving golden wheat, and just from a mile down the road, I could see a house with a silo. It looked different. No orchard from my dream, just a green silo and a red, pristine house. I didn't recognize it, but it felt so similar. I had to see inside. I drove off the side of the road near it, turning off my lights and putting it in neutral as I approached, trying to be quiet just in case. Maya was still asleep, and I was unwilling to endure the wrath of waking her after such a long ride. Mike and I went ahead. He lit a joint as we walked up. Why the fuck are we here again? He raised his eyebrow in my direction. I chuckled. Just wait, bro. I heard there were local country girls in your area right behind that door. I pointed at the newly painted green door. Seriously though, according to legend, these pristine barn houses are set up all around with no real explanation, all unlocked and modern, completely vacant. So, no girls then. Damn, that's fucking creepy. Though, I wonder what they're used for. He took a long inhale before putting it out on the golden knocker of the front door. The barn house was freshly painted red, and the porch was empty. The underside of the roof was green, and it hung over the porch slightly. We could see a window on the house and looked in at blank walls and well-lit rooms. There was no sign of life, but the inside looked clean and cold. Looks empty. Mike, what's the move? I thought this was your plan. Genius. Probably this. He opened the door with no caution, cockily smiling as he did so. Empty, just like you said. He went in, and I followed. It was strange. It was an ideally kept house with no furniture, no art, and no signs of life at all. It was all dull white grey, except for a green door with a golden knocker and a gold door handle, just like the front door. It was all freshly painted and smelled stale and stagnant, even though there was an unnaturally cold draft coming from within. Mike got goosebumps all up and down his right arm, and I shivered as we went in. It must have been below 40 degrees. I talked to Mike in a low whisper. Strange. It's empty but seems new. Yeah, but just one door is creepy. Put on a couch or something. I looked around more. There was just a big living room and one door. No stairs, even though the house looked taller, with no bathroom and no kitchen. God, I'm stressed. Michael says. I nod, slowly turning the knob. My stomach is rolling and folding in on itself at the implications of this. It started about a month ago. I woke up in the middle of the night, thirsty as hell. As I stumbled to the kitchen for a glass of water, I noticed a sliver of light coming from Ethan's room. The door was cracked open, and I could see his small silhouette framed against the window. Ethan, I called softly, pushing the door open. What are you doing up, buddy? He didn't turn around. He just stood there, staring out into the darkness. Ethan, I tried again, a little louder this time. Finally, he looked at me, his eyes wide and unfocused. Daddy, it's time, he said, his voice flat and emotionless. A shiver ran down my spine. Time for what, Bud? But he didn't answer. Instead, he climbed back into bed and pulled the covers up to his chin. Within seconds, he was fast asleep. I checked my phone. 2:12 a.m. Weird. But kids do strange things sometimes. Right. I tucked Ethan in and went back to bed, chalking it up to a random night terror or sleepwalking episode. The next night, I woke up again around 2 a.m. Call it parental instinct or just paranoia, but something made me check on Ethan. Sure enough, there he was at the window again. I checked my phone, 2:12 a.m. on the dot. This time, I didn't say anything. I just watched him from the doorway. He stood there, perfectly still, for exactly 5 minutes. Then, just as I was about to intervene, a sound pierced the silence that made my skin crawl. Knock, knock, knock. 3 sharp raps on our front door. Ethan didn't react. He just climbed back into bed like nothing had happened. With my heart pounding in my chest, I crept downstairs and peered through the peephole. The porch light illuminated an empty stoop. No one was there. I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence, maybe some drunk teenager playing a prank, but a nagging feeling in my gut told me something wasn't right. For the next week, the same thing happened every single night. Ethan at the window at 2:12 a.m., knocking at 2:17 a.m., no one at the door. I tried talking to Ethan about it during the day, but he had no memory of getting up at night. He just looked at me with those big, innocent eyes and asked if we could have pancakes for breakfast. I was starting to lose it. I wasn't sleeping. I couldn't focus at work. Every night, I'd sit on the stairs, watching Ethan's door, waiting for 2:12 a.m. with a mixture of dread and morbid curiosity. One night, about 10 days in, I decided to do something different. At 2:10 a.m., I quietly entered Ethan's room and stood next to his bed. As the clock ticked over to 2:12, his eyes snapped open. He Saturday up, but when he saw me, he frowned. Daddy, he whispered, you shouldn't be here. Why not, buddy? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Because, he said, his eyes darting to the window. She's waiting. My mouth went dry. Who's waiting? Ethan. But before he could answer, the knocking started. Only this time, it wasn't coming from the front door. It was coming from the other side of Ethan's bedroom window. Knock, knock, knock. The knocking stopped as suddenly as it had started. In the eerie silence that followed, I could hear my own ragged breathing and the frantic pounding of my heart. "Ethan," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Get away from the window. Now." But my son didn't move. His eyes were fixed on something outside, something I couldn't see. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his small hand and pressed it against the glass. That's when I saw it. A hand on the other side of the window, mirroring Ethan's. Long, skeletal fingers with blackened nails. The skin was pale and waxy, like that of a corpse left too long in water. "Jesus Christ," I yelled, lunging forward to grab Ethan. But as soon as my fingers touched his shoulder, he let out an ear-piercing scream that made me stagger backward. The hand outside the window vanished, and Ethan collapsed onto the floor, his body convulsing violently. I scooped him up, my mind reeling with panic. As I turned to rush him out of the room, my eyes caught something that made me freeze in my tracks. There, scratched into the window glass, were 5 words I ming for him: John. A wave of dread washed over me. How the hell did it know my name? I ran downstairs with Ethan in my arms, fumbling for my phone to call 911, but as soon as I hit the bottom step, every light in the house flickered and died. In the pitch darkness, I heard something that sent chills down my spine. Scritch, scritch, scritch. The sound of nails dragging across wood, coming from every direction at once. "Daddy," Ethan whimpered, his small body trembling against mine. "She's inside now." I sprinted for the front door, my free hand outstretched in the darkness. But when I grabbed the doorknob, it was ice cold and slick with something wet. I yanked my hand back, feeling warm liquid dripping down my wrist. The coppery smell of blood filled my nostrils. "You can't leave, John," a voice whispered, so close I could feel fetid breath on my neck. It sounded like Marie, but wrong, like her voice was being forced through a throat full of gravel. "We're a family again." "You're not Marie," I choked out, backing away. "My wife is dead." A chilling laugh echoed through the house. "Dead? Oh, John, I'm so much more than dead." Suddenly, the lights flickered back on. I blinked, momentarily blinded. When my vision cleared, I saw her. Marie stood at the foot of the stairs, but it wasn't the Marie I remembered. Her skin was grey and bloated, her eyes sunken and filled with a sickly yellow light. Her once beautiful hair hung in wet, rotting clumps around her face. She wore the same dress we buried her in, now stained with dirt and God knows what else. "Marie," I breathed, unable to believe what I was seeing. Her mouth stretched into an impossibly wide grin, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. "I've come to take our son home. John, it's time for Ethan to join me." Ethan squirmed in my arms, reaching out towards the thing that looked like his mother. "Mommy," he called, his voice a mixture of fear and longing. The creature's eyes locked onto Ethan, and she took a step forward. The floorboards creaked and squelched under her bare, mud-caked feet. "No," I shouted, clutching Ethan tighter. "You're not taking him." I turned and ran for the kitchen, my mind racing. Salt. I needed salt. Wasn't that supposed to work against spirits or something? As I fumbled through the cabinets, I could hear Marie's wet footsteps getting closer. The air grew cold, and the putrid stench of decay filled the room. "Oh, John," her voice sing-songed from just outside the kitchen. "You can't protect him forever. Ethan belongs with me now." I finally found the salt and turned around, ready to throw it. But what I saw made the container slip from my numb fingers. Marie stood in the doorway, but her body was wrong. Her limbs were elongated, joints bent at impossible angles. Her head lolled to one side, neck stretched and distorted, and behind her, writhing in the shadows, were dozens of arms, reaching, grasping. Ethan screamed. In that moment, as I stared into the abyss of that horrifying scene, I knew our lives would never be the same. Whatever was wearing Marie's face, whatever had been coming for my son night after night, it wasn't going to stop, and I had no idea how to fight it. The thing that wasn't Marie lurched forward, its grotesque limbs scrabbling across the kitchen floor. I backed away, clutching Ethan to my chest, my mind blank with terror. My back hit the kitchen counter, and I realized we were trapped. Please, I begged, though I knew reasoning with this creature was futile. Please, just leave us alone. The thing cocked its head at an unnatural angle, Marie's once beautiful features twisting into a mockery of confusion. Leave you alone? But John, we're family, and family should be together, forever. One of its many arms shot out, impossibly fast. Grabbing my ankle, I yelped as icy fingers dug into my flesh, the chill spreading up my leg like poison. Ethan whimpered in my arms, his small body shaking uncontrollably. In that moment of pure desperation, something inside me snapped. A surge of protective rage coursed through my veins, burning away the paralyzing fear. I wouldn't let this thing take my son. I couldn't. With a roar, I kicked out at the creature's face. My foot connected with a sickening squelch, and it reeled back. Momentarily stunned, I seized the opportunity, charging past it towards the basement door. If we couldn't leave the house, maybe we could find a way to trap it. I slammed the basement door behind us and fumbled for the light switch. The dim bulb flickered to life, casting long shadows across the cluttered space. Ethan clung to me, his face buried in my shoulder. "Daddy," he whispered, "I'm scared." "I know, buddy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But we're gonna be okay, I promise." That's when I saw it. In the corner of the basement, partially hidden behind some old boxes, was a door I'd never noticed before. It looked ancient, its wood warped and stained with age. From upstairs came the sounds of splintering wood and shattering glass. The creature was tearing the house apart looking for us. With no other choice, I approached the mysterious door. As I reached for the handle, Ethan suddenly spoke up. "That's where Mommy comes from," he said matter-of-factly. I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Ethan." He pointed at the door. "Every night at 2:12, that door opens. Mommy comes out and goes to my window. She says she misses us and wants us to come with her. But I was scared, so I didn't open the window." My mind reeled. How long had this been going on? And why 2:12 a.m.? Then it hit me. 2:12 a.m., February 12th, the day Marie died. Before I could process this revelation, the basement door exploded inward. The creature that wore Marie's face came slithering down the stairs, its body contorting in ways that defied physics. "Found you," it hissed, its voice a chorus of whispers. I grabbed the handle of the mysterious door and yanked it open. Beyond it was not the foundation of our house, but a swirling vortex of shadows and mist. The air that rushed out was frigid and smelled of decay. The creature let out an inhuman shriek. "No, you can't send me back. I won't go alone." It lunged at us, its numerous arms outstretched. In that split second, I made a decision that would haunt me forever. I set Ethan down and kissed his forehead. "I love you, buddy. Always remember that." Then, using all my strength, I shoved the creature towards the open door, but as it teetered on the threshold, one of its arms wrapped around my waist. I looked at Ethan, saw the terror and confusion in his eyes. "Run, Ethan. Run upstairs and don't look back." The last thing I saw was my son's tear-streaked face as the creature and I fell through the doorway into the abyss beyond. I don't know how long I fell. Time seemed to have no meaning in that place of shadows and whispers. But eventually, I crashed onto what felt like solid ground. I opened my eyes to find myself back in my own basement. The old door had vanished, leaving only a blank wall. Sunlight streamed through the small windows. Morning had come. Painfully, I climbed the stairs, calling out for Ethan. I found him curled up on the living room couch, sleeping peacefully. When I woke him, he had no memory of the night's events. It's been a week since that terrible night, The scratches on Ethan's window are gone, as if they never existed. He no longer gets up at 2:12 a.m. To all appearances, our lives have returned to normal. But I know better. Sometimes, late at night, I hear whispers coming from the basement, and in my dreams, I see Marie, the real Marie, reaching out to me from beyond a door I can never open. I don't know if the creature will find another way back. I don't know if it's truly gone, or if it's just biding its time. All I know is that every night, I check on Ethan at 2:12 a.m., and every night, I pray that the knocking doesn't start again. The invitation came as a surprise. Arlo, my friend since freshman year, had always been the life of the party. With his chiseled good looks, charismatic personality, and bottomless trust fund, he was the quintessential frat boy. But behind the boisterous laughter and endless stream of social events, Arlo had a softer side that only a few got to see. I was one of those few. He called me up one Friday evening. "Hey, want to go on a boat trip? My dad's yacht. Just a small group. Thought we could use a break." I hesitated. I liked my quiet weekends, reading or tinkering with my photography. But the thought of being cooped up in my apartment for another weekend didn't appeal either. Plus, Arlo could be convincing. Sure, sounds like fun. I finally agreed. Our group was an eclectic mix. There was Marissa, sweet and kind-hearted, always ready to lend a hand or a shoulder to cry on. Her boyfriend, Alan, was the protective type, always making sure everyone was safe and having a good time. Bradley, who had recently dropped out of college, was trying to find his footing. He had a restless energy about him, as if he was constantly searching for something just out of reach. We set off on a crisp Saturday morning. The sky was a perfect blue, the kind that makes you believe nothing bad could ever happen. Arlo's dad's yacht was impressive, all gleaming wood and polished metal. We loaded up supplies, laughed, and settled in for what we thought would be a relaxing weekend. The first day was perfect. We swam, sunbathed, and ate way too much junk food. Arlo and Alan took turns showing off their diving skills, while Marissa and I laughed at their antics. Bradley was quieter than usual, staring out at the horizon, lost in his thoughts. As evening approached, the sky began to change. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, an ominous sign. Arlo dismissed our concerns with a wave of his hand. "It's just a little storm. We'll be fine." The storm hit harder than any of us expected. One moment, the sea was calm. The next, we were being tossed around like a toy in a bathtub. Lightning flashed, illuminating the terror on our faces, and the rain came down in sheets, blinding us. "Get below deck," Arlo shouted over the wind. "We need to ride this out." We scrambled below, the yacht rocking violently. Water leaked in from somewhere, pooling at our feet. Arlo and Alan fought to keep the boat steady, but it was a losing battle. The storm was relentless. In the chaos, I noticed something strange. Amidst the howling wind and crashing waves, there were whispers, faint, almost inaudible. But there, I looked around, but no one else seemed to notice. I shook it off, blaming it on the stress and noise. When the storm finally passed, the relief was palpable. We emerged, soaked and shaken but alive. The yacht had taken a beating, but it was still afloat. We spent the next few hours assessing the damage and making repairs. It wasn't until later that we realized Bradley was missing. "Bradley," Marissa called out, her voice tinged with panic. "Where are you?" We searched the yacht from top to bottom, but there was no sign of him. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The last anyone had seen of him was just before we went below deck. Alan had been helping him secure some loose gear. "He was right there," Alan said, his face pale. I turned around for just a second, and he was gone. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe he had fallen overboard, though none of us could remember hearing a splash. Maybe he had been swept away by the waves. But deep down, we knew something else was at play. That night, as we tried to sleep, the whispers returned, louder this time, insistent. I lay in my bunk, heart pounding, listening. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, filling the small cabin with their eerie presence. "Do you hear that?" I whispered to Arlo, who was in the bunk across from mine. He nodded, his eyes wide with fear. "What the hell is that?" We woke the others, but Marissa and Alan insisted it was just the wind. They were trying to be logical, to stay calm, but the fear in their eyes betrayed them. The next morning, things took a turn for the worse. Marissa was gone. We found her bunk empty, her belongings untouched. Alan was frantic, searching the yacht and calling her name until his voice was hoarse. But she was gone, just like Bradley. Alan was inconsolable. He spent hours staring out at the sea, whispering Marissa's name. Arlo and I tried to keep it together, but the tension was unbearable. We were stranded, with no way to call for help, and whatever was out there was picking us off one by one. As night fell, the whispers grew louder, almost deafening. This time, there was no denying it. We all heard them, a chorus of voices, angry and mournful. "We need to get out of here," Arlo said, his face grim. "Whatever is out there, it's coming for us." But there was nowhere to go. We were trapped on the yacht, surrounded by endless ocean. The next morning, Alan was gone. His disappearance was the most disturbing of all. There were signs of a struggle, scratches on the walls, a trail of blood leading to the edge of the deck. It was clear he hadn't gone quietly. Arlo and I were the only ones left. The whispers had grown louder, more insistent. They seemed to follow us. No matter where we went on the yacht, sleep was impossible. We took turns keeping watch, though it felt futile. On the last night, the whispers reached a crescendo. They were no longer just background noise. They were inside our heads, echoing through our minds. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder, and when I turned, there was no one there. "Arlo," I said, my voice shaking. "We need to do something. We can't just sit here and wait to die." He nodded, his eyes haunted. "I know, but what can we do?" That night, we heard footsteps on the deck above. Slow, deliberate. They circled the yacht, stopping occasionally. We huddled together in the cabin, clutching makeshift weapons. Arlo with a broken oar, and me with a kitchen knife. The footsteps grew louder, descending the stairs. The door to the cabin creaked open, and a figure stood in the doorway. It was Bradley, or what was left of him. His eyes were hollow, his skin pale and wet, as if he had been dragged from the depths of the ocean. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice a hollow echo. Behind him, Marissa and Alan appeared, their faces twisted with anger and pain. "You should have stayed away," they whispered in unison. Arlo and I backed away, our hearts pounding. The ghosts of our friends advanced, their expressions filled with a mix of sorrow and rage. "We're sorry," I said, my voice barely audible. "We didn't mean for this to happen." Bradley stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Arlo. "You brought us here. You should have known." Arlo's face crumpled, guilt and fear warring within him. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I didn't know." The ghosts moved closer, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. The air grew colder, and I could see my breath in the dim light. "There's no escape," Marissa said, her voice like a knife cutting through the silence. "You're part of this now." Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Arlo's father, his face etched with sorrow and determination. "Father," Arlo gasped, his voice filled with disbelief. Arlo's father stepped forward, his gaze locking onto his son. "I should have told you," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "This yacht, it's cursed. I thought I could keep it a secret, that I could protect you, but I was wrong." The ghosts turned their attention to Arlo's father, their whispers growing louder, more accusatory. "You brought us here," they chanted. "You brought us here." Arlo's father took a deep breath, his eyes filled with pain. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." He stepped forward, placing himself between us and the ghosts. "Take me," he said, his voice resolute. "Leave them alone." The ghosts hesitated, their forms flickering like candle flames in the wind. Then, with a final, mournful whisper, they disappeared, leaving the cabin silent once more. Arlo's father turned to us, his face pale and drawn. "Go," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Get out of here. Save yourselves." Arlo and I didn't need to be told twice. We scrambled out of the cabin, our hearts pounding, and made our way to the lifeboat. The sea was calm now, the storm a distant memory. We rowed for hours, the yacht growing smaller and smaller in the distance. Neither of us spoke, the weight of what we had witnessed pressing down on us like a suffocating blanket. The silence between us was heavy, filled with unspoken fears and questions. When we finally reached the shore, the sun was rising, casting a warm glow over the landscape. We stumbled onto the beach, exhausted and traumatized. For a moment, we just lay there, letting the reality of our survival sink in. Arlo was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "What are we going to do now?" I looked at him, my mind racing. The events of the past few days felt like a nightmare, too surreal to be true. But the pain and loss were real, and so were the ghosts that haunted us. "We need to tell someone," I said, my voice shaking. "We can't keep this to ourselves." Arlo nodded, but there was a distant look in his eyes. I knew he was thinking about his father, the sacrifice he had made to save us. The guilt and sorrow were etched into his face, and I wondered if he would ever be the same again. In the weeks that followed, we were questioned by the authorities. We told them what we could, but left out the supernatural elements. We knew they would never believe us. The official story was that the storm had caused the accidents, leading to the deaths of our friends and Arlo's father. But Arlo and I knew the truth. The yacht was cursed, haunted by the spirits of those it had claimed. The whispers and the apparitions were real, and they had left an indelible mark on our souls. Arlo withdrew into himself, spending long hours alone, staring out at the sea. He refused to talk about what had happened, and I could see the pain and guilt eating away at him. I tried to be there for him, but there was only so much I could do. As for me, I was plagued by nightmares. I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, the whispers echoing in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had escaped something far worse than death, and that it was still out there, waiting. One night, several months after our ordeal, I received a frantic call from Arlo. His voice was filled with panic and fear, and I could barely make out what he was saying. "They're back," he whispered. "The whispers, they're back." I rushed over to his apartment, my heart pounding. When I arrived, I found him in a state of utter terror. He was pale and shaking, his eyes wild with fear. "They won't leave me alone," he said, his voice trembling. "I can't take it anymore." I tried to calm him down, but it was no use. The whispers had returned, louder and more insistent than ever. I could hear them too, a haunting chorus that filled the room. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice shaking. "We need to find a way to end this." Arlo looked at me, desperation in his eyes. How? How do we stop this?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that we couldn't keep running. We had to face whatever was haunting us and find a way to make it stop. We decided to return to the yacht, hoping to find some clue or way to end the curse. The journey back was filled with dread, the whispers growing louder with each passing mile. When we arrived, the yacht was just as we had left it, a ghostly silhouette against the dark water. We boarded cautiously, every creak and groan of the ship sending shivers down our spines. The whispers guided us below deck, to the cabin where it had all begun. There, we found a hidden compartment filled with old, dusty journals. They belonged to Arlo's father, detailing the history of the yacht and the curse that plagued it. We learned that the yacht had been built on cursed land, a place where many had died under mysterious circumstances. The spirits of those lost had latched onto the yacht, doomed to haunt it forever. The only way to break the curse was to perform a ritual, returning the yacht to the cursed land and offering a sacrifice. Arlo looked at me, his eyes filled with determination. "We have to do this. It's the only way to end it." I nodded, knowing he was right. We prepared for the ritual, gathering the necessary items and making our way to the cursed land. As we performed the ritual, the whispers grew deafening, a cacophony of anger and sorrow. The air grew colder, and the spirits of our friends appeared, their faces twisted with pain and rage. "You brought us here," they chanted. "You must pay the price." Arlo stepped forward, his face pale but resolute. "Take me," he said, his voice steady. "Let my sacrifice end this." The spirits hesitated, their forms flickering. Then, with a final, mournful wail, they converged on Arlo, their cold hands reaching out to claim him. "No," I shouted, trying to pull him back, but it was too late. The spirits surrounded him, their whispers filling the air. Arlo turned to me, a sad smile on his face. "It's okay," he said. "This is my choice." As the spirits dragged him away, the yacht began to shake, the air filled with a blinding light. I was thrown back, the force of the ritual knocking me unconscious. When I woke up, the yacht was gone, and I was lying on the shore of the cursed land. The air was still, the whispers finally silent. I knew that Arlo's sacrifice had ended the curse, but the cost was too great. I was alone, the last surviving member of our group. The pain and loss were overwhelming, but I knew I had to move on. Arlo had given his life to save me, and I couldn't let his sacrifice be in vain. As I walked away from the cursed land, I made a promise to myself. I would live my life to the fullest, in honor of those we had lost, and I would never forget the lessons I had learned about the dangers that lurked just beyond the veil of our reality. "They've found me. They're pounding on the door. It won't hold for much longer. I'm trapped. There's no escape. Please accept this post as my dying declaration. More importantly, let it be a warning to you, to all of you, because the fate of the entire human race could rest upon what I'm about to tell you. Before I go any further, I beg you, do not dismiss what I'm about to reveal as a prank or hoax. It's so unbelievable I can scarcely believe it myself. If I were not living this nightmare in real time, I would have laughed at how far-fetched it all sounds. I was living my best life. Not easy, given I'm a wheelchair-bound teenage girl living on a rundown ranch in the middle of nowhere, but I was determined to make the most of it. I was a straight-A student and captain of the girls' softball team. Sure, I needed someone to be my legs, but boy could I swing that bat. I had a happy upbringing thanks to my elderly foster parents, Jack and Ruth, who raised me since I was a toddler. The way they tell it, my mom had eventually succumbed to her opioid addiction on the couch in our ramshackle home in Lincoln County. She had been there for several days, leaving me upstairs all alone. I had somehow managed to scramble out of my crib, desperately looking for food, despite only being 18 months old. Weak from hunger, my legs gave way, and I tumbled down the stairs. I may have lost the use of my legs that day, but I gained the most loving foster parents you could ever wish for. They doted on me. They made sure I never went hungry ever again. I often teased them, calling them feeders, and I guess they saw the funny side because they always responded by saying, "Eat up at mealtime." The joke was wearing thin. My 16th birthday was rapidly approaching, and I was concerned about how much weight I had gained. There was a boy in class that I liked, and I wanted to look my best. But when I shared my concerns with my foster mom, she told me I was being silly, and if anything, I had lost weight. When I complained that my clothes were starting to feel too tight, she smiled and said, "You're turning from a girl into a woman. They're bound to feel tight." I nodded. It made sense. A few days before my birthday, I saw her gift wrapping a beautiful dress. It was red with lots of frills and sequins. I was so excited I could hardly wait to try it on. Later that day, I saw the same dress sticking out of the trash. I was devastated and wondered what I had done wrong. I had done my chores. I had eaten my dinner, every last morsel as they had demanded. It made no sense. I gazed longingly at my birthday dress as it drowned in a sea of trash. I wanted so much to rescue it from its terrible fate. Eventually, I reached for it. The silk felt so soft against my delicate skin. As I held it against me, the label landed on my lap. It looked like it had been removed with a pair of scissors. I glanced at it and immediately noticed that the dress was at least 2 sizes smaller than the label suggested. That's why they threw it away. It was way too small, I told myself. I would not have thought any more of it had I not seen my gift exactly where my foster mom had left it earlier that morning. It was untouched. I sensed something was off. I grabbed my birthday present and tore at the wrapping. Inside was an identical dress, except this one was my size and sure to fit. I beamed like a Cheshire cat. My crush was bound to notice me in it. For a moment, it was probably the happiest I had been in my entire life. But then my eyes zoomed in on the label. It was the wrong size. I knew instantly that my foster mom had switched the labels. She wanted me to think I was much slimmer than I am. It was like a kick in the teeth. I suspected that I had gained a lot of weight, and here was the evidence to prove it. Furious, I spun my wheelchair around and headed towards the living room to confront her. As I approached, I could hear what sounded like conspiratory whispers. I peered through a crack in the door and saw my foster mom utter, "I hope she tastes as good as she looks." My foster dad looked predatory as he licked his lips and whispered, "Sweet 16. They started to cackle like a pair of hyenas on the hunt. Their disturbing chuckles rang in my ears as I charged into the bathroom in my wheelchair. I barely had my head in the toilet before the contents of my stomach erupted like Mount Vesuvius. My heart pounded as I wiped my mouth clean. The 2 people I loved most in the world had been fattening me up like a plump Thanksgiving turkey so they could devour me. I couldn't believe it. I had to know more about these monsters whom I had spent most of my life calling Mom and Dad. I rifled through the cupboard drawers looking for something, anything. I pulled out several bills and invoices, but nothing incriminating. I paused for a moment. "Think, Cassie, think." My mind raced. I suddenly muttered, "The tool shed." My foster dad spent an ungodly amount of time there. Yet, he never seemed to make anything or fix anything. The wheels on my wheelchair spun like Boudica's war chariot as I charged outside. I checked to ensure the coast was clear and entered the shabby structure. A strange humming sound greeted me. Distracted by the weird noise, my wheelchair brushed against a workbench. The impact caused a bottle of weed killer to topple over. I caught it mid-air and put it back, next to a small blood-stained axe. I felt sure it was human blood, but I couldn't get that damn noise out of my head. It was coming from behind a dusty old curtain that looked like it had been a food source for moths since the dawn of civilization. I yanked the curtain hard. A cloud of dust enveloped me. I coughed and spluttered as I frantically rubbed my eyes, desperate to see what it was concealing. I was confronted with an imposing, solid oak door reinforced with thick strips of wrought iron. The incessant humming sound grew ever louder. I turned the handle, expecting the door to be locked. To my surprise, the door slowly creaked open. I gasped as my vision fell upon an array of state-of-the-art computers and servers that looked like they belonged in NASA's headquarters, not my foster dad's tool shed. I was desperate to discover what secrets the high-tech equipment was holding, but knew I needed something to protect me in case I was disturbed. I promptly grabbed the axe and weed killer off the workbench and placed them on my lap. My fingers caressed the keyboard as I attempted to gain access to the password-protected information concealed within the hard drive of one of the many computers. I wondered what dark secrets they were hiding as I typed variations of all the passwords I could think of. Just as I was on the verge of giving up, I noticed a small trunk tucked in the corner beneath a workstation. It was covered in cobwebs and had a rusted padlock. I wasted no time in breaking it open with the axe. Inside was an old driver's license with my foster dad's name on it, dated 1947. Lying next to it was a framed, black and white picture of my foster parents. They looked the same now as they did back then. How was that possible, I wondered? Almost 80 years had passed, but they had not aged a day. At the bottom of the trunk, there was an old scrapbook. I quickly thumbed through it. There were several newspaper clippings of the Roswell incident. Not too surprising, I reasoned. After all, it was practically on our doorstep and was big news back then. I continued to flick through it. To my horror, there were several Polaroids of teenage girls spanning decades, each blowing out the candles on a birthday cake as my foster parents looked on admiringly. All the girls looked like they were carrying a few too many extra pounds. Much like me, Moreover, each cake had 2 numbered candles. The first one was the number 1. The second was the number 6. My brain instantly generated a myriad of questions. Who are these girls? Where are they now? Why are there no photos of them celebrating any other birthday besides their 16th? I feared the worst. Am I next? I wondered. I gazed at their innocent, smiling faces as they blew out the candles on a cake they probably never even got to taste. I focused on the candles. An idea suddenly jumped out at me. I hastened over to the same computer as before and hurriedly typed in the number 16. It failed. I tried 16. Access was denied yet again. I turned away from the computer screen, defeated. I was on the verge of giving up when I decided on one final try. I typed in the words, Sweet 16. The screen suddenly loaded. I was in. I couldn't help myself and whispered, Sick son of a bitch, because of my foster dad's twisted cannibalistic desires. I studied the monitor as an array of text appeared on the screen. There were no actual words. Rather, it was a huge sequence of similar numbers such as 0111 and 0111. Fortunately, math was my strongest subject. I didn't particularly like it, but I understood it. I instantly recognized the numbers as binary code and set about deciphering it as best I could. Just as I believed things could not get any worse, the seriousness of the situation escalated to catastrophic levels. I began to decipher words such as planet, attack, destroy, and colonization. My heart raced as I started to make sense of the numerical text. It quickly became apparent that Jack and Ruth were aliens from an unknown planet whose inhabitants were preparing to attack us. My so-called foster parents were seemingly on a scouting expedition when they crash-landed near Roswell in 1947. They had probably murdered Jack and Ruth and stolen their identities and all their possessions, including their ranch. Hiding in plain sight, they had been reporting back to their home planet ever since. As I continued deciphering the code, I noticed the text was becoming increasingly dark. There was mention of sustainable farming, accompanied by drawings of dozens of young girls in individual cages. They were all shackled with feeder tubes inserted in their mouths. Breeding farms were also discussed. The best male livestock would be used to produce a continuous food supply. Tears filled my eyes when I saw their plans for the rest of the population. Virtually every male, man or boy, is to be put to death, their bodies to be used as a source of heat. A similar fate awaited the sick and the elderly. The only human survivors in this terrible new world would be girls aged 0 to 16, with a life expectancy of 16 years. Once they reached this milestone, they were to be slaughtered and eaten. My stomach churned as I discovered why 16-year-old girls were so prized by this alien race. It was apparent that my foster parents had documented their culinary exploits in great detail. They had sampled human flesh from all ages and sexes, newborn to elderly. Their comments were grotesque and way too graphic. Phrases such as too fatty, too tough, and too grisly were common. It was suggested that the raging hormones in pubescent girls is the reason the meat tastes so sweet and flavoursome, with 16 being the optimum age to slaughter the livestock. My body shook head to toe as I tried to process these shocking revelations. I knew that I had to try and stop them somehow. My mind raced as I tried to devise a plan of action. I thought about returning to the house to get my cell phone so that I could call the cops. I had left it on charge, but was sure it would have enough battery to make multiple calls by now. I decided it was too risky and opted to put everything I had discovered in a folder and email a copy to the relevant authorities. I set about creating a folder. My fingers frantically pounded the keyboard. I was almost done when I heard footsteps. I eyed the weed killer and knew what I had to do. I reasoned that maybe I could take them with me as I quickly unscrewed the cap. I discarded the empty bottle of weed killer just as my foster parents started pounding on the door, demanding that I let them in. I gripped the axe tight as the door suddenly exploded into a pile of kindling. My heart pounded like a drum. I realized that Jack and Rose had morphed into their true selves. No way could 2 elderly folk have destroyed the door with such force. I was expecting slimy, green creatures with tentacles. However, They are far more hideous and threatening. They have both transformed into a huge black mass, which is more animalistic than human. It was like staring at a pair of silhouettes. Yet, they exude power and have multiple limbs with claws the size of daggers. Their mouths are huge, with row upon row of razor-sharp, triangular-shaped teeth with a vicious, serrated edge. They are like no apex predator I have ever seen. It is like looking at the shadows of two giant, multi-limbed grizzly bears with the jaws of a great white, capable of enormous ferocity and damage. I'm beginning to feel incredibly nauseous. I'm not sure if it is sheer terror or the weed killer starting to take effect. Either way, I'm determined to keep the contents of my stomach intact in the hope that they get a nasty little surprise when they devour me. I take great comfort in knowing I will taste anything but sweet. Hopefully, I won't be the only one who breathes their last today. They're still 20 feet away, but are edging closer towards me. Drool drips from their huge, shark-like teeth as they salivate in anticipation of their feast. They're almost within touching distance now. I can feel their hot breath on my soft skin as I frantically finish typing up this post with my left hand. My right hand grips the axe tight. I may be disabled, but I'm going out swinging. I pray you heed my warning and notify the authorities immediately. They're inches away. I've just enough time to click submit. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If you dare to explore further, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling tales of horror and the supernatural. Remember, the shadows hold endless mysteries, waiting to be unveiled. Stay tuned for more bone-chilling stories as we continue to traverse the eerie depths of the unknown together. Until next time, may your dreams be free from the haunting echoes of our tales. Or perhaps not.